You are already 32 and still single. Must be tough spending Christmas all alone. My sister sneered loud enough for the entire extended family to hear over the holiday music. I set my crystal wine glass down, wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, and said calmly, "Do not worry about me. I have been happily married for 3 years to the man who literally owns your husband's entire company." My mother froze mid-toast, her smile completely vanishing. What they did not know was that my simple sentence was about to send my golden child sister and her scammer husband straight to federal prison. My name is Gemma, and I am 32 years old. I work as a senior corporate liquidator for a top-tier asset management firm in Manhattan. My job is to find financial discrepancies and shut down failing businesses. I am very good at recognizing a bad investment. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to watch your toxic family praise a fraud while treating you like garbage. Trust me, the karma in this story is something you will want to hear. It was Christmas Eve at my parents' sprawling suburban estate, a house funded entirely by crippling credit card debt and a desperate need to keep up appearances. We were all seated around their massive mahogany dining table. The roasted turkey was getting cold, but nobody cared, because everyone was too busy worshiping my younger sister Sabrina and her charismatic husband DeAndre. Sabrina was 29 and had never held a job for more than 3 months. Yet there she sat dripping in fresh diamonds and wearing a designer silk dress that cost more than my first car. DeAndre was holding court at the head of the table. He was a slick-talking guy who always wore custom-tailored suits and aggressively expensive cologne. He claimed to be a senior vice president at a major real estate holding company. My parents, Patricia and Richard, treated him like a living god. They hung on to his every word as he bragged about closing multi-million-dollar deals and flying first class to Dubai. I just sat there quietly eating my green beans. That was when Sabrina decided the spotlight was not bright enough on her, so she had to drag me into it. She leaned across the table, her diamond necklace catching the chandelier light. "You are already 32 and still single. Must be tough spending Christmas all alone in that tiny apartment of yours." She laughed, a high-pitched grating sound. "Maybe if you spent less time auditing boring corporate files and more time at the salon, you could find a nice mid-level manager to settle down with." The whole table erupted in mocking laughter. My aunts, uncles, and cousins all chuckled, shaking their heads at poor, pathetic Gemma. I set my glass down and looked her dead in the eye. "Do not worry about me, Sabrina. I have been married for a long time." The laughter abruptly died. My mother, Patricia, froze mid-toast. Her hand holding a glass of champagne trembled slightly before she slammed it down onto the table. "Gemma." She snapped, her voice sharp and dripping with disgust. "Stop this right now. It is pathetic. You are so desperately jealous of your sister's perfect marriage that you are resorting to psychotic delusions at the dinner table. You are ruining Christmas." My father, Richard, chimed in, shaking his head in deep disappointment. "Really, Gemma. We know you are struggling with being the family spinster, but making up an imaginary husband is a new low even for you. Apologize to your sister for trying to steal her thunder." I did not flinch. I did not cry. I just offered a tight, polite smile. "I am not making anything up, Mother," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. DeAndre let out a loud, booming laugh. He leaned back in his chair, unbuttoning his suit jacket to reveal his expensive silk vest. "Let the girl dream, Patricia," he said, dripping with condescension. "If making up a fake husband helps her sleep at night, let her have it. Besides, I think we need to focus on real marriages tonight." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy set of keys, tossing them onto the center of the table with a loud clatter. "Merry Christmas to my beautiful wife. I just bought you that brand new Porsche Cayenne you wanted, paid in cash straight off the showroom floor." Sabrina shrieked with delight, jumping up to hug him, while the rest of the table clapped and cheered. My parents looked like they were ready to weep with joy at their son-in-law's incredible success and generosity. But I was not looking at DeAndre or Sabrina. My eyes were locked entirely on the keys sitting in the middle of the table. More specifically, I was staring at the heavy matte black metallic keychain attached to them. It had a very distinct geometric logo engraved into the metal along with a tiny serial number on the back. It was not a dealership keychain. It was a corporate fleet tag. And I recognized that logo instantly because it belonged to the private holding company owned entirely by my actual husband, Harrison Wells. DeAndre had not bought a Porsche in cash. He had somehow stolen a corporate executive vehicle from the man I sleep next to every night. I kept my face perfectly neutral, tearing my eyes away from the stolen Porsche keys. I needed more evidence before I dropped the guillotine on DeAndre's fragile little world. Right on cue, the private chef my mother had hired for the evening walked into the dining room. He carried a silver tray holding a leather billfold. The total for the lavish six-course catered holiday meal was $2,500. My parents always insisted on hosting these extravagant dinners to show off to the extended family, but they never actually intended to pay for them. DeAndre stood up, raising his glass of expensive whiskey. He looked around the table, basking in the adoration of my relatives. Family is everything, he declared, his voice booming with fake authority. And as the man of this house, the one who provides, I want to say how blessed I am to be able to take care of my beautiful wife and contribute to this amazing lifestyle we all share. Cheers to wealth, health, and being at the top of the food chain. The table clapped eagerly. My father Richard nodded in deep respect. The chef extended the silver tray toward DeAndre, assuming the man making the grand speech was footing the bill. DeAndre reached into his tailored suit jacket, his confident smile faltering for just a second. He patted his chest pockets, then his pants, putting on a highly exaggerated show of confusion. "Oh man, I left my alligator leather wallet in the center console of the new Porsche," he said, shaking his head with a practiced sigh. "I would go get it, but the security system is calibrating right now." He looked across the mahogany table directly at me and quickly slid the leather billfold across the polished wood until it stopped right in front of my plate. "You got this one right, Gemma. Consider it your contribution to the family. After all, Sabrina and I just dropped 6 figures on that car out there." I looked down at the staggering $2,500 check, then back up at the man who was currently driving a stolen corporate vehicle. "Are you joking?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "I am not paying for a dinner I did not order or organize." My mother Patricia immediately slammed her hand on the table, her heavy rings clinking aggressively against the wood. "Stop being so cheap, Gemma," she snapped, glaring at me like I was a burden she could not wait to discard. "DeAndre is practically a vice president. He does enough for us. You do not have kids. You do not have a real mortgage. You sit alone in a tiny apartment all day. You can easily afford to treat your family for once in your miserable life." The sheer audacity of her statement made my blood run cold. I did not raise my voice, but the icy tone of my words cut through the dining room like a knife. "I could afford a lot more things, Mother, if I was not still paying off the $40,000 student loan you secretly took out in my name 12 years ago. The room went dead silent. My uncle cleared his throat awkwardly, suddenly very interested in his empty wine glass. Patricia's face turned beet red, a mixture of profound embarrassment and furious rage. She hated when anyone threatened her perfect maternal image. "That was for Sabrina's wedding fund," she hissed through gritted teeth, leaning across the table so only the immediate family could hear her venom. "We are a family. We make sacrifices for each other. You are so utterly selfish holding on to ancient history just to get out of paying for a simple dinner. Pay the chef right now and stop embarrassing us in front of the help." I looked at the private chef who was awkwardly staring at the ceiling, pretending not to hear the massive dysfunction unraveling before him. I did not want to ruin his Christmas Eve, and honestly, paying this bill was a small price to keep my cover intact for just a little longer. I reached into my designer purse, bypassing my standard debit cards. My fingers brushed against the heavy matte black metal card hidden in the back slot. It was an exclusive Centurion card tied directly to Harrison's private equity accounts, A card you could only get by invitation if you spent millions annually. I pulled it out and placed it onto the silver tray without a single word. The chef's eyes widened fractionally as he recognized the weight and distinct design of the metal card. He bowed slightly, took the tray, and hurried out of the room to process the payment. Across the table, the air shifted completely. Sabrina had stopped gloating about her car. Her sharp eyes were fixed on the exact spot where the black card had just been. She knew exactly what it was. While my parents were busy whispering furiously to each other about my bad attitude, I watched Sabrina slowly slide her smartphone up from her lap. She angled the camera lens directly toward the kitchen door, waiting like a predator for the chef to return. When he came back and handed me the card along with the lengthy receipt, I caught the subtle flash of Sabrina's phone camera under the table. She had just taken a picture of the exclusive black card. And knowing my sister, she was already plotting a way to use it against me. The dinner finally ended with a stiff and uncomfortable goodbye. I grabbed my thick wool coat from the hallway closet and walked out into the freezing December air. The gravel driveway was covered in a thin layer of winter frost. I just wanted to get into my car, turn on the heater, and drive back to my quiet life in the city. But of course, my sister was not going to let me leave in peace. Her heavy designer heels clicked sharply on the pavement behind me, breaking the quiet of the night. She grabbed my arm and spun me around violently. "Where did you get it?" she demanded, her breath pluming in the cold night air. "Get what, Sabrina?" I asked, pulling my arm out of her tight grip. "That black card." "I saw it," she hissed. She stepped closer, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. "Do not play dumb with me, Gemma. You make a decent salary as a liquidator, sure. But not Centurion card money. Not even close. You have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just to keep that piece of metal active. So tell me the truth right now. Are you an escort?" I stared at her, genuinely baffled by her massive leap in logic. "An escort? It makes perfect sense," she sneered, crossing her arms over her expensive coat. "You are 32, single, and totally desperate for attention. You probably found some old rich sugar daddy who feels sorry for a plain girl like you. That is why you made up the fake husband tonight at the table, to cover your tracks. You are trying to act like you are on my level, but you are just selling yourself to look rich." Before I could even formulate a response to that insane and deeply offensive accusation, DeAndre strolled up beside her. He was twirling the stolen Porsche keys around his index finger, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He wrapped a heavy arm around Sabrina's waist and glared down at me. "Is there a problem out here, babe?" he asked, trying to sound like a tough, protective alpha male. "Gemma is hiding something." Sabrina pouted, leaning into his chest. "She has a black card and refuses to say how she got it. I think she is involved in something illegal." DeAndre let out a low, exaggerated whistle. He looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and predatory amusement. "A black card? Huh? That is playing in the big leagues. Gemma, you know financial crimes are a very serious offense. Fraud, money laundering, escorting without declaring income to the IRS. People go to federal prison for that kind of stuff. I am not doing anything illegal," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady and devoid of emotion. "And my personal finances are absolutely none of your business." DeAndre took a heavy step closer, intentionally invading my personal space to intimidate me. The overpowering smell of his expensive cologne made me want to gag. "Everything that happens in this family is my business," he said, completely dropping his friendly dinner table facade. "I am a senior vice president, Gemma. I sit in boardrooms with billionaires. I oversee massive real estate portfolios. I have high-level connections at the absolute top of corporate America. If you are bringing dirty money into this family, it reflects badly on my pristine reputation. And I simply will not allow that to happen." He pointed a thick, manicured finger directly at my face. "I am going to investigate you. First thing tomorrow morning, I am making a few important calls. I have access to top-tier background check software through my corporate executive portal. I will dig up exactly where your money comes from, who you are sleeping with, and what laws you are breaking. And when I expose your pathetic little lies, your parents are going to disown you permanently." I looked at his smug, arrogant face and had to physically bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from laughing out loud at the pure irony of his threat. "Be my guest, DeAndre," I said softly. "Look me up. Let us see exactly what you find on that corporate portal of yours." He sneered at me, shaking his head like I was a lost cause. He turned his back, opened the passenger door of the sleek black Porsche for Sabrina, and then walked around to the driver's side. They peeled out of the icy driveway, the powerful engine roaring loudly as they sped down the quiet suburban street. I stood alone in the cold, watching their red taillights disappear into the distance. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and saw my husband's name flashing brightly on the screen. I answered the call. "Hello, Harrison," I said, the cold air stinging my cheeks. "Hey, honey." His deep, calm voice came through the speaker. "I hope the family dinner was tolerable. Listen, I was just reviewing the daily security logs for the company servers, and something very amusing just popped up." "Oh," I asked, a genuine smile finally breaking across my face. "What is that?" "A low-level regional manager in our acquisitions department named DeAndre just tried to run a fully unauthorized high-clearance financial background check on you through the company portal," Harrison said, sounding both annoyed and highly entertained. "He used his own corporate ID to do it. Did he upset you tonight? Because I can fire him right now." "Do not fire him yet," I told my husband as I unlocked my car door and slid into the driver's seat. "Let him play his little games. I want to see exactly how far he is willing to dig his own grave." Harrison chuckled, a rich, warm sound that instantly grounded me. "Just say the word darling," he replied. "Drive safe. I will see you at home." The next morning, the winter sun was barely peeking through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse when my phone started vibrating relentlessly against the marble nightstand. I groaned, reaching over to silence it, but the screen was lit up with dozens of unread notifications. Our massive extended family group chat, which usually only saw traffic during holidays and birthdays, was completely exploding. I sat up in bed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and opened the messaging app. There it was. A blurry, zoomed-in photo of my matte black Centurion card sitting on the silver payment tray from last night. Sabrina had sent it at 6 in the morning with a massive paragraph attached. "I am so sorry to share this with everyone on Christmas morning," her message read. "But as a family, we cannot ignore the truth anymore. Gemma paid for dinner last night with a black card that requires millions of dollars in spending to maintain. We all know she does not make that kind of money pushing papers at a liquidation firm. DeAndre and I are extremely concerned that she is involved in severe illegal activities, money laundering or worse, high-end escorting. DeAndre is trying to run a background check through his corporate resources to protect the family, but she is being incredibly defensive and hostile." My jaw tightened as I scrolled through the replies. Aunts and uncles who had not spoken to me in years were suddenly chiming in, expressing their shock and disappointment. My cousin wrote that she always knew I was hiding a dark secret because I never brought a man to family events. It was a digital witch hunt, orchestrated entirely by a spoiled woman who had never worked a day in her life. Before I could even type out a response, my screen switched to an incoming call. It was my mother. I took a deep breath and answered. "Merry Christmas to you too, Mother," I said flatly. "Do not use that tone with me," Patricia snapped, her voice trembling with righteous fury. "I have been fielding calls from your relatives all morning. You have humiliated us for the absolute last time, Gemma. Sabrina is right. You are hiding dirty money, and you are putting DeAndre's pristine corporate reputation at risk just by associating with him." I rubbed my temples, fighting off an impending headache. "Mother, the card is perfectly legal. My husband gave it to me." "Stop lying about this imaginary husband," she shrieked into the receiver. "You are sick, Gemma. You need serious psychiatric help. But right now, we need to handle the financial liability you have brought onto this family." "I spoke to DeAndre this morning. He is willing to overlook your hostility and help you clean up whatever mess you are in. He runs a highly exclusive private investment fund for top-tier clients. If your money is actually legitimate, you will wire $10,000 into his fund right now. I stopped breathing for a second. Excuse me? You heard me, Patricia demanded. Wire the money to DeAndre. It will prove to the entire family that your finances are above board, and DeAndre can manage it properly to keep you out of federal prison. If you refuse to do this one simple thing to prove your innocence, your father and I are officially disowning you. We will write you out of the will, we will take back your grandmother's cabin, and you will never speak to any of us again. The sheer audacity of her demand echoed in the quiet bedroom. She was weaponizing my entire family against me just to extort $10,000 for her favorite son-in-law. You want me to wire $10,000 to a man who steals corporate vehicles? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The answer is no. You can keep your family mother. I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the mattress. The bedroom door clicked open and Harrison walked in. He was wearing soft sweatpants and a fitted gray shirt, holding 2 steaming mugs of black coffee. Tucked under his arm was a thick manila folder. He handed me a mug and sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes gleaming with sharp, calculating intelligence. Was that Patricia? He asked, taking a sip of his coffee. Yes, I sighed, leaning back against the headboard. She demanded I wire $10,000 to DeAndre's highly exclusive private investment fund to prove my money is clean. If I do not, I am disowned. Harrison let out a short, sharp laugh. He opened the manila folder and spread several printed financial documents across the white duvet. He tapped his finger against a highlighted bank routing number. Well, darling, he said smoothly, that makes things incredibly convenient for us. My security team finished tracing the network address DeAndre used to run that background check on you. They went ahead and audited his recent digital activity. This private investment fund your mother wants you to wire money into? It does not exist. It is a completely fake shell account DeAndre set up 3 months ago. He has been using it to embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars directly from my company. I stared at the financial documents scattered across my bed, my mind racing to process the sheer scale of DeAndre's stupidity. He was not just a liar and a phony. He was a corporate criminal actively stealing from my husband. A slow, deeply satisfying smile spread across my face. I looked up at Harrison, who was calmly sipping his coffee. Do not fire him, I said softly. Do not alert the authorities yet. Let him keep digging. I want to see exactly how deep this hole goes before we bury him in it. Harrison smiled back, a dangerous glint in his eyes. As you wish, darling. 3 days passed in relative silence. The family group chat had cooled down from the black card drama, mostly because I simply stopped replying to their endless barrage of invasive questions. I spent the time working from home, enjoying the peace of my own life. But on the morning of December 28th, my phone chimed with a new aggressive notification. It was a digital invitation from Sabrina, heavily decorated with gold glitter graphics and animated champagne flutes. The bold, arrogant text across the top read, "You are cordially invited to an exclusive New Year's Eve gala to celebrate the purchase of our brand new $4 million estate." The location was a highly prestigious, secluded address in the Hamptons. Sabrina had attached a dozen photos of a sprawling, ultra-modern glass and stone mansion overlooking the water. Her caption below the photos read, "DeAndre just closed the deal in cash. Come see what real success looks like. Dress code is strictly black tie." I was still staring at the ridiculous, flashy invitation when my phone screen switched to an incoming call. It was my mother. I answered, bracing myself for another exhausting lecture. "You received the invitation," Patricia said immediately, her tone dripping with smug satisfaction. "I expect you to be there, Gemma. And I expect you to bring this imaginary billionaire husband of yours. Sabrina and DeAndre have been incredibly gracious to even include you after your jealous little stunt at Christmas. This is your absolute last chance to publicly apologize to them and admire their new home." I let out a harsh, dry laugh. Mother, I am not driving 3 hours to the Hamptons in the freezing cold just to stroke DeAndre's fragile ego. I have my own plans for New Year's Eve. The smugness in Patricia's voice instantly turned to pure venom. You will be there, Gemma. You will show up, and you will bring whoever this man is that you claim to be married to, so we can finally expose your pathetic lies to the entire family. If you do not show up, your father and I are taking immediate legal action against you. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white against the sleek case. What are you talking about? Your grandmother's cabin, she spat. We have already spoken to a lawyer this morning. We are fully prepared to challenge the deed in court. We will testify that she was not of sound mind when she transferred that property exclusively to you. We will tie you up in probate court for years until the legal fees bankrupt you, and then we will sell that rotting pile of wood to the highest bidder. But if you come to the party, show proper respect to your sister, and admit you lied about being married, we will drop the matter entirely. My blood ran ice cold. That small rustic cabin in the woods was the only thing my grandmother had left me. It was the only place from my childhood where I had ever felt truly safe and loved, far away from my parents' constant criticism. Patricia knew exactly how much that property meant to me emotionally, and she was weaponizing it just to guarantee an audience for Sabrina's vanity project. They wanted to humiliate me so badly, they were willing to destroy my only sacred memory. Fine, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the rage boiling inside me. I will be there, and I will bring my husband. I hung up the phone before she could gloat any further. Harrison walked into the room a moment later, noticing the dark, tense expression on my face. He walked over and gently placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. What did she do now? He asked quietly. I handed him my phone, keeping the flashy digital invitation open on the screen. They are threatening to sue me for my grandmother's cabin if I do not show up to Sabrina's New Year's Eve party, I explained, trying to keep my anger in check. Apparently, DeAndre just bought a $4 million mansion in the Hamptons in cash, and my mother wants me to go worship his immense success. Harrison looked down at the bright screen. His eyes scanned the bold text and the glossy photos of the sprawling estate. Then he looked at the exact street address listed at the bottom of the page. For a long moment, Harrison did not say a word. He just stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. Then a slow, dark, highly amused smile spread across his handsome face. He started to chuckle, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated through his chest. I looked at him, entirely confused by his reaction. What is so funny? Harrison tapped the address on the screen with his index finger. Darling, DeAndre did not buy a $4 million estate, he said, his voice rich with anticipation. I know this property intimately. My holding company purchased this exact address 2 years ago. It is our exclusive corporate retreat. Your brilliant brother-in-law has somehow used his employee access to reserve my company property, and he is trying to pass it off to your family as his own home. Let them have their party, Gemma. We are definitely going. The drive to the Hamptons on New Year's Eve was bitterly cold, but the heated leather seats of Harrison's private sedan kept the chill away. We pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of the estate right at 8 o'clock. The property was illuminated by dozens of ambient landscape lights showcasing the sweeping modern architecture of the corporate retreat that my husband actually owned. The driveway was already packed with luxury vehicles. Valets hired for the evening were frantically running back and forth parking cars for the dozens of guests DeAndre and Sabrina had invited to witness their fake empire. Harrison stopped the car near the front entrance, but he did not turn off the engine. You go ahead and make your grand entrance, darling, he told me, a mischievous gleam in his eye. I need to make a quick phone call to the actual estate manager who works for me to ensure our security team is ready for the finale. I will park the car around back and join you inside shortly. I smiled, kissed his cheek, and stepped out into the freezing night air. I walked up the wide stone steps, wearing a floor-length emerald silk gown. The massive double oak doors were propped wide open, spilling warm yellow light, and the sound of a live string quartet out into the winter night. I stepped into the grand foyer. It was breathtakingly opulent, featuring soaring vaulted ceilings, a cascading crystal chandelier, and imported Italian marble floors. The room was packed with our extended family, my parents' friends, and a crowd of strangers DeAndre had clearly invited just to show off. Almost immediately, the clinking of champagne glasses and the low hum of wealthy chatter were interrupted by my sister's piercing voice. "Look, everyone, the spinster sister finally made it," Sabrina announced loudly, making sure her voice carried over the classical music. Conversations paused. Dozens of heads turned in my direction. Sabrina strutted toward me wearing a ridiculous skin-tight silver sequined dress that caught the light from every angle. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes raking over my gown with clear envy, before she crossed her arms and looked pointedly behind me at the empty doorway. "Where is the imaginary billionaire husband?" She mocked, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Did his hourly rental fee bounce? Or did he realize how pathetic it is to be seen with you in public?" A few of my aunts and cousins snickered softly from the sidelines. I did not let my smile waver for a single second. "He is just parking the car, Sabrina," I replied calmly, handing my coat to a confused-looking valet. "He will be right in." She rolled her eyes violently, clearly not believing a word I said. Before she could launch another insult, DeAndre appeared from the living room. He was holding a crystal flute of expensive champagne, leading a captivated group of relatives on a grand tour of the property. He wore a velvet tuxedo jacket and looked incredibly pleased with himself. "Welcome to my humble abode, Gemma," DeAndre said, spreading his arms wide as if he were a king welcoming a peasant into his castle. "I am glad you could make it. I actually designed the interior architecture of this entire level myself. It took me months of intense consulting with top-tier contractors to get the modern open concept flow exactly right. I had to bite the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper. I knew for an absolute fact that Harrison's private design firm had finalized the layout of this corporate retreat 3 years ago." DeAndre took a sip of his champagne, looking me up and down. "It is nice to see you out of those cheap office clothes for once. You know, since my real estate division is expanding so rapidly, I might actually have a spot for you. We desperately need a new receptionist at the front desk to handle phone calls and fetch coffee. It pays a lot better than whatever you do liquidating bankrupt stores. I can put in a good word with the senior executives if you promise to behave yourself." My parents, who were standing right next to him, nodded in aggressive agreement. Patricia shot me a dark, warning look, silently demanding that I thank him for his profound generosity. Instead of answering, I simply walked past him, stepping directly into the main living space. My eyes locked onto the massive stone fireplace. Hanging directly above the mantel was a stunning, highly distinct piece of modern abstract art. I turned back to DeAndre, feigning absolute awe. "This piece is incredible, DeAndre," I said, making sure my voice was loud enough for his entire tour group to hear. "It looks exactly like the rare original painting from the private art collection of Harrison Wells, the billionaire CEO of your parent company. How on earth did you manage to get your hands on it?" DeAndre swallowed hard. The color instantly drained from his face, and his confident, arrogant smile completely vanished. He tugged nervously at his tight collar. I bought it at an exclusive underground auction last month," he stammered, completely avoiding my gaze. I bought it at an exclusive underground auction last month," he stammered, completely avoiding my gaze. I offered him a tight, knowing smile. "Wow," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly innocent. "You must have outbid some very important people for that." DeAndre tugged at his collar again, his face flushed an ugly shade of red. He quickly ushered the tour group toward the outdoor patio, desperate to put as much distance between us as possible. I decided to retreat to the kitchen to grab a glass of sparkling water, needing a moment away from the suffocating crowd of sycophants. The kitchen was a chef's dream, complete with industrial stainless steel appliances and endless stretches of white marble countertops. I had barely poured my water when the heavy swinging door pushed open. My mother Patricia marched in her heels, clicking aggressively against the tile. She scanned the empty room to ensure there were no witnesses before turning her icy glare directly onto me. Her jaw was set and her arms were crossed tightly over her chest. "I see you managed to show up," she hissed, stepping closer. "And you are alone. Again. Where is this phantom husband of yours?" I took a slow sip of my water. "He is handling some business outside. He will be here soon." Patricia rolled her eyes, letting out a sharp, dramatic sigh. "Enough with the delusions, Gemma. We both know nobody is coming through those doors for you." She pointed a sharp, manicured finger at my chest, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Since you decided to grace us with your presence, you are going to make yourself useful. In 30 minutes, everyone is gathering in the main hall for the midnight toast. You are going to take a glass of champagne, stand up in front of the entire party, and make a public speech. You will apologize to Sabrina and DeAndre for your jealous, psychotic behavior at Christmas. And then you will toast to their incredible success and this beautiful new estate. Do you understand me?" I stared at her, genuinely astounded by her audacity. "You want me to publicly worship a man who is actively lying to all of you?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "Absolutely not. I will not apologize, and I am certainly not toasting to DeAndre's imaginary empire." Before Patricia could unleash her fury, the kitchen door swung open again. My father, Richard, walked in, his face red with anger. He had clearly been listening from the hallway. He stepped up next to my mother, forming a united front of parental disappointment. "Why do you have to be so difficult?" Richard demanded, his voice thick with disgust. "Your sister has achieved everything we ever dreamed of. She has a wealthy, successful husband who provides for her and elevates our entire family name. And what do you have, Gemma? You have a tiny apartment, a boring job, and a head full of pathetic lies." He took a step closer, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "You are a bitter, jealous disappointment. You push everyone away because you cannot stand to see anyone else happy. If you keep acting like this, you are going to die completely alone." His words were meant to crush me. 10 years ago, they would have broken my heart and sent me running from the room in tears. But standing there in my husband's $4 million corporate retreat, looking at the two people who had sold me out for a cheap illusion of wealth, I felt absolutely nothing but pity. "I am not the one pushing people away, Father," I said quietly, "and I am definitely not the one living a lie. Enjoy your fragile little fantasy while it lasts, because it is about to come crashing down." Richard scoffed, shaking his head. "You are completely unhinged." Before he could say another word, a loud, echoing commotion erupted from the front foyer. The sound of angry shouting carried clearly through the heavy wooden doors. Patricia and Richard exchanged a panicked look and rushed out of the kitchen. I followed closely behind them, my heart beating with quiet anticipation. In the center of the grand entrance, the head caterer was standing face to face with DeAndre. The caterer was holding a wireless payment terminal in one hand and waving a long receipt in the other. "I do not care who you claim to be," the caterer yelled over the suddenly silent crowd. "Your platinum credit card just declined for a $15,000 charge. We are not serving a single plate of food to anyone until we get paid in full right now." The entire grand foyer fell into a dead, suffocating silence. The classical string quartet playing in the corner abruptly stopped. Dozens of wealthy guests, extended family members, and business associates turned to stare directly at the center of the room. DeAndre's face flushed a deep, blotchy crimson. He quickly grabbed the head caterer by the arm, trying desperately to pull him away from the center of attention and into the hallway. "Keep your voice down," DeAndre hissed, forcing a tight, artificial laugh for the staring crowd. "It is obviously a simple bank error. My private wealth management team places strict fraud holds on my high net worth accounts whenever there are large, unusual transactions. It happens to billionaires all the time. It is a standard security measure." The caterer crossed his arms, completely unimpressed by the theatrical performance. "I do not care about your wealth management team or your security measures," the caterer replied. his voice still carrying clearly across the marble room. You have exactly 10 minutes to produce a valid payment of $15,000, or my entire staff is packing up the kitchen, loading the trucks, and leaving immediately. Panic rippled through the room. Sabrina pushed her way through the crowd, her sequined silver dress flashing under the crystal chandelier. She looked absolutely terrified. A New Year's Eve party without food or champagne would permanently ruin her carefully crafted high society image. She scanned the room frantically, and her eyes locked instantly onto me. "Gemma," she demanded, her voice shrill and dripping with desperate entitlement. "Give him your card. The black one. Pay the caterer right now. You owe us for ruining Christmas." I stood my ground, clutching my designer evening bag. I looked at her, then at DeAndre, who was suddenly looking at me with pleading, pathetic eyes. "No," I said simply, my voice carrying clearly through the quiet room. "I am not paying $15,000 to fund your fake party." Sabrina stomped her foot like a spoiled toddler throwing a tantrum in a toy store. "You are ruining my night. You have the money. Just swipe the card so we can eat." My mother. Patricia stepped up right behind Sabrina. Her eyes were wild with a frantic need to save face in front of her country club friends. "Give me the purse," Gemma, Patricia commanded, stepping dangerously close to me. "We are not going to be humiliated in our own home because you want to be selfish and stubborn." When I did not immediately hand over my bag, Patricia lunged forward. She dug her sharp manicured fingernails into my bare wrist and yanked the gold chain strap of my purse, trying to physically tear it away from my body. Gasps echoed around the room as the guests watched a mother physically assault her own daughter over a catering bill. I reacted instantly. I ripped my arm out of her grasp and stepped back, holding up a firm, unwavering hand. "Do not ever touch me again," I warned, my voice echoing like thunder off the marble walls. The absolute coldness and authority in my tone made Patricia freeze in her tracks. "If you ever try to lay hands on me or take my property again, I will have the valet call the police. I will file assault and attempted robbery charges against you right here in front of every single person in this room." Patricia gasped, stepping back as if she had been violently slapped across the face. My father, Richard, looked horrified, but neither of them dared to cross the physical boundary I had just drawn. The illusion of their perfect, loving family was shattering in real time. Seeing that he could not bully or physically force me into paying his massive bill, DeAndre began to panic. He pulled out his cell phone, his hands shaking slightly as he scrolled through his contacts. "Fine, nobody needs your dirty money anyway," he spat, trying desperately to regain his alpha male persona. "I will just have my financial director authorize a direct wire transfer from one of my corporate accounts." He dialed a number and put the phone to his ear, pacing nervously near the grand sweeping staircase. He thought he was far enough away from the crowd, but he was standing directly next to a large acoustic marble pillar that perfectly amplified his voice. As a corporate liquidator, I knew exactly what he was about to do. I discreetly slid my phone out of my purse, opened the voice memo app, and pressed record. "Yeah, Jason," DeAndre whispered harshly into the phone. "I need you to bypass the secondary approval on the Commercial Acquisition Fund. Wire 15 grand to the catering vendor right now. Code it as a site inspection expense for the new development project. I do not care if it flags the system, just force it through the portal before the midnight audit." I smiled a genuine, satisfied smile as I hit stop on the recording and slipped the phone back into my purse. DeAndre had just authorized felony wire fraud and corporate embezzlement live at his own party, and I had caught every single word of it in crisp, high-definition audio. A few minutes later, the caterer's wireless payment terminal beeped with a loud, approving chime. The $15,000 transaction had successfully cleared. The head caterer gave a curt nod, waved his hand, and immediately his staff sprang into action. Silver trays of caviar, roasted duck, and crystal glasses of expensive champagne began floating through the crowd. The crisis was technically averted, and a collective sigh of relief washed over the grand foyer. The string quartet struck up a lively classical tune, and the guests went back to their shallow high society mingling. Sabrina quickly recovered her fake glamorous hostess persona, laughing loudly with her friends, as if the humiliating standoff had never even happened. But DeAndre was not recovering so easily. I watched him from across the room. He was sweating profusely, continuously wiping his forehead with a linen napkin and nervously checking his phone every few seconds. He was terrified that his illegal midnight wire transfer had triggered a corporate alarm. He looked up and caught me staring at him. I did not look away. I just offered him a slow, incredibly knowing smile. That was all it took to make him snap. DeAndre slammed his champagne flute onto a passing tray and stormed through the crowd directly toward me. Before I could say a word, he grabbed me roughly by the elbow and forcefully dragged me away from the party, pulling me down a quiet, dimly lit hallway and shoving me into a secluded private library. He slammed the heavy oak door shut behind us, cutting off the music and the chatter. "You need to wipe that smug, pathetic look off your face right now," he sneered, his chest heaving with barely contained panic and rage. I smoothly adjusted the sleeve of my emerald gown, completely unfazed by his physical intimidation. "Are you feeling stressed, DeAndre?" I asked calmly. "It must be exhausting trying to manage so many massive corporate accounts at once." He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "You think you are so smart, Gemma. You think because you work as a lowly corporate liquidator that you understand how real wealth operates. Well, you do not know anything. And I am sick and tired of you looking at me weirdly all night. You are making Sabrina anxious, and you are embarrassing my brand." "I am not doing anything but standing here," I replied. "You are the one who just publicly begged for a handout." DeAndre took a menacing step closer, backing me toward a large mahogany bookshelf. "I am a senior vice president," he growled, his voice thick with unearned arrogance. "I play golf with billionaires. I sit on charity boards with the senior partners of your exact liquidation firm. Do you understand what that means? It means I have actual power. I can make one single phone call on Monday morning and have you fired before you even reach your desk. I can have you permanently blacklisted from the financial sector in Manhattan. You will never work in this industry again." I stared at him, genuinely marveling at the sheer magnitude of his delusion. He was a mid-level employee drowning in stolen debt, yet he was standing in my husband's house threatening to fire me from a career I had built with my own bare hands. "So here's how this is going to work." DeAndre continued, mistaking my silence for fear. "Since you decided to be utterly useless tonight and cause a scene in front of my important guests, you owe my wife an apology gift. First thing Monday morning, you are going to call your lawyer. You are going to sign the deed to your grandmother's cabin completely over to Sabrina. She wants to bulldoze that ugly wooden shack and build a summer rental property on the land. You will give it to her quietly, and in exchange, I will not destroy your miserable little career. Do we have a deal?" The sheer disrespect of his demand was staggering. He wanted to bulldoze the only pure memory I had left of my childhood just to build a cheap rental house to fund his fake lifestyle. I looked him dead in the eye, dropping all pretenses of politeness. "You are not going to make any phone calls on Monday, DeAndre," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "And you are certainly never touching my grandmother's property." He scoffed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Is that right? And who is going to stop me? Your imaginary husband?" Before I could answer, a massive commotion erupted from the front of the house. The heavy oak door of the library swung open and one of my cousins poked her head in, her eyes wide with absolute shock. "DeAndre, you need to come out here," she gasped breathlessly. "Someone very important just arrived." DeAndre puffed out his chest, adjusting his velvet tuxedo jacket, assuming one of his supposed wealthy friends had finally shown up. He pushed past me and marched confidently down the hallway back into the grand foyer. I followed closely behind him, my heart beginning to race with pure adrenaline. The entire party had gravitated toward the soaring floor-to-ceiling windows at the front of the estate. The guests were murmuring to each other in hushed, awestruck tones. Outside, gliding smoothly up the long circular driveway, was a sleek jet-black Maybach. The luxury vehicle came to a silent stop directly in front of the main entrance, bathed in the glow of the landscape lights. The crowd literally gasped as the driver stepped out, followed immediately by two massive, highly trained private security guards in sharp black suits. One of the guards walked to the back door of the Maybach and pulled it open. Out stepped Harrison, wearing a flawlessly tailored midnight blue tuxedo, looking every inch the ruthless billionaire tycoon that he truly was. The king had officially arrived at his own castle. The massive heavy oak double doors of the grand foyer swung completely open, held firmly by the two private security guards. Harrison stepped over the threshold and into the bright, sparkling light of the entrance hall. The string quartet, which had just started playing a lively tune, faltered and quickly faded into a disorganized, awkward silence. Every single eye in the massive room was instantly fixed on the man walking through the front door. Harrison moved with the effortless, predatory grace of a man who owned everything he looked at. His midnight blue tuxedo was flawlessly tailored to his broad shoulders, and his rare silver watch caught the light of the cascading crystal chandelier overhead. Sabrina was the first to break the stunned, suffocating silence. She let out a sharp, grating laugh that echoed loudly off the imported Italian marble floors. "Oh my God!" she shrieked, pointing her manicured finger directly at Harrison. "You actually did it! You actually went out and rented a high-end escort. I cannot believe how pathetic you are, Gemma. How much did you pay this guy to wear a nice suit and pretend to like you for the night? Did you use that fake black card to cover his hourly rate?" A few of my extended family members murmured some chuckling nervously at Sabrina's cruel joke, while others just stared openly at the imposing stranger. DeAndre, eager to reclaim the spotlight and reassert his dominance over his supposed territory, puffed out his chest and marched aggressively toward the front door. He adjusted his velvet jacket, putting on his best intimidating glare to confront the intruder. "Excuse me, pal," DeAndre said loudly, stepping directly into Harrison's path to block his way. "I do not know what kind of desperate hourly rate my sad sister-in-law is paying you, but this is a private, highly exclusive VIP event. I am the owner of this $4 million estate, and I am telling you to turn around and get back in your rental car before I have my valets throw you out onto the street by your collar." Harrison did not slow his pace. He did not blink. He did not even look at DeAndre. He simply kept walking forward, moving with such undeniable, terrifying authority that DeAndre instinctively stumbled backward to avoid a physical collision. It was the ultimate display of disrespect. Harrison walked right past the man claiming to own the house, treating him like an invisible, insignificant piece of furniture. I watched with a genuine, triumphant smile as my husband crossed the grand room, his eyes locked entirely on me. The sea of wealthy guests naturally parted to let him through, sensing the quiet power radiating from him. He stopped right in front of me, reached out, and gently pulled me by the waist. He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, confident, and deeply passionate kiss that completely shattered the ridiculous escort theory in an instant. When he pulled away, he offered me a warm, loving smile. "You look absolutely breathtaking tonight, darling," he said softly, his deep voice carrying through the quiet room. "I am sorry I am late." The board meeting ran much longer than expected. My mother, Patricia, stood frozen just a few feet away, her jaw practically resting on the floor. My father, Richard, looked completely bewildered, his eyes darting wildly around the room. Harrison finally turned his attention to them, his expression instantly shifting from warm affection to cold, polite indifference. "Good evening," Harrison said, extending a hand that my father was too stunned to even try to shake. "You must be Patricia and Richard. I am Harrison Wells. I apologize for missing the family Christmas dinner last week, but it is a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Gemma and I have been happily married for 3 years now." Patricia stared at him, her eyes darting frantically between Harrison's custom-tailored tuxedo, his expensive watch, and the two massive security guards standing silently by the front door. "Married?" she stammered, her voice completely devoid of its usual arrogant bite. 3 years. No, that is impossible. Gemma is lying. She is just trying to ruin this night for Sabrina." Harrison tilted his head slightly, an amused, highly dangerous smile playing on his lips. I assure you, Patricia, our marriage certificate is very real. And my brilliant wife has absolutely no need to upstage anyone in this room. A few yards away, the arrogant bluster had completely drained out of DeAndre. He was standing near the sweeping staircase, staring intently at the side of Harrison's face. The expensive velvet tuxedo jacket suddenly looked heavy and suffocating on his shoulders. The name Harrison Wells echoed loudly in his mind, striking a deep, terrifying chord. He recognized that sharp jawline. He recognized those cold, calculating eyes. He had seen that exact face printed in high-gloss ink on the first page of the corporate manifesto distributed to every single employee at his parent company. DeAndre suddenly went deathly pale, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead, as his brain desperately tried to process why the ultimate boss of his entire corporate universe was standing in the living room claiming to be married to the woman he had just threatened to destroy. For a long moment, the only sound in the grand foyer was the crackling of the massive stone fireplace. DeAndre looked like he was going to physically pass out. But my mother, completely oblivious to the sheer panic radiating from her favorite son-in-law, quickly recovered her arrogant posture. She crossed her arms and looked Harrison up and down with an expression of profound disgust. Well, Harrison, Patricia scoffed, her voice dripping with condescension. You certainly know how to make an entrance. But renting a Maybach and hiring a couple of oversized bouncers for the night does not impress me. We are not fools. Anyone can play dress-up for a few hours to save face. So tell me, what exactly do you do for a living to afford that rented suit? Because my daughter certainly does not make enough to fund this little charade. Harrison let out a soft, polite chuckle. He smoothly unbuttoned his tuxedo jacket and slipped his hands into his pockets, looking entirely at ease in the center of the hostile room. I assure you, Patricia, the suit is mine, he replied calmly. As for my profession, I work in asset management and corporate restructuring. I oversee investments, liquidate liabilities, and occasionally acquire distressed properties. Sabrina burst into a loud theatrical laugh. She walked over and wrapped her arm tightly around DeAndre, who was standing as rigid as a statue. Asset management, she mocked, rolling her eyes dramatically. So you are just a glorified accountant. You sit in a cubicle all day pushing boring papers around. No wonder Gemma kept you hidden. I would be embarrassed too if my husband was just a low-level number cruncher. She leaned her head against DeAndre's shoulder, completely missing the way he violently flinched at her touch. Look at my husband, Sabrina, boasted to the crowd, gesturing wildly around the grand foyer. DeAndre is a senior vice president. He actually builds things. He commands a real estate empire. He just bought this entire $4 million estate in cash without even blinking. You and Gemma could work for 100 years and never even afford the property taxes on a place like this. Harrison smiled, a brilliant, blinding smile that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. Is that so? He asked, his voice smooth as silk. He finally turned his full, terrifying attention directly onto DeAndre. DeAndre swallowed so hard I could hear it from 3 feet away. It is incredibly impressive, DeAndre, Harrison said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. Buying a property of this magnitude in cash is quite the achievement, especially considering the highly complex legal framework surrounding this specific stretch of the Hamptons shoreline. DeAndre opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, breathless squeak came out. He cleared his throat frantically, sweat dripping down his temples. Thank you, he managed to stammer, his eyes darting toward the front door, as if calculating his chances of escaping into the night. Since you are such a high-level real estate mogul, Harrison continued, his tone conversational, but laced with lethal intent. I am very curious about how you navigated the commercial zoning permits for this estate. As I understand it, this particular parcel of land is permanently zoned under a corporate hospitality classification, which carries a strict commercial tax abatement. How did you manage to bypass the state shoreline restrictions to rezone it for private residential use? And more importantly, how did you clear the corporate lien held by the original parent company without triggering an automatic federal audit? The entire room fell into an uncomfortable, heavy silence. The wealthy guests, many of whom were actual investors and business owners, leaned in closer. These were basic fundamental questions that any real estate executive operating at DeAndre's supposed level would be able to answer in their sleep. DeAndre stood frozen under the crystal chandelier. His face turned a sickly shade of gray. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then opened it again, like a dying fish. My legal team handles the minor paperwork, he stuttered, his voice shaking violently. The zoning, as you know, it is grandfathered in. The Shoreline Commission granted a special variance because of my high net worth portfolio. And the corporate lien was just a clerical error that we resolved over the phone. A collective murmur of confusion and secondhand embarrassment rippled through the crowd. Several of the actual wealthy guests exchanged skeptical, mocking glances. Even someone with zero real estate experience could tell he was just throwing random, meaningless buzzwords together in a desperate panic. Sabrina looked at him, her confident smile faltering for the very first time. DeAndre. What are you talking about? She whispered loudly. Just tell him how you bought it. Harrison tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly as he delivered the final, devastating blow. A clerical error resolved over the phone. That is fascinating, DeAndre, because federal corporate liens require a notarized release from the board of directors. But please tell us more about this magical variance you received. I am learning so much from you tonight. DeAndre swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his tight collar. The mocking smiles from the wealthy guests were starting to burn through his carefully constructed facade. Realizing he was completely outmatched in actual financial knowledge, he decided to abandon the debate about corporate liens and fall back on his favorite weapon: intimidation by association. He let out a loud, forced laugh and waved his hand dismissively at Harrison, trying desperately to regain control of the narrative. I do not need to stand here and justify my real estate transactions to some mid-level asset manager, DeAndre sneered, his chest heaving as he tried to project an alpha male posture. You can throw around all the technical jargon you want to try and impress my wife's family, but at the end of the day, you are just a nobody in a rented suit. I operate on a completely different level. In fact, I answer directly to the billionaire CEO of the parent company that owns this entire development sector. Sabrina immediately puffed out her chest, sensing an opportunity to finally crush my husband's calm demeanor. That is exactly right, she bragged, leaning heavily into DeAndre and glaring directly at me. My husband is personal friends with the CEO. They play golf together at the private country club every single month. The CEO personally mentors DeAndre. He even sent us a massive luxury gift basket when we bought this house. So you and your little accountant husband should really watch your mouths before DeAndre makes one phone call and gets you both blacklisted from the financial industry forever. I had to physically bite down on the inside of my cheek to stop myself from laughing out loud. Hearing my sister boast about a fictional friendship with a man standing less than 2 feet away from her was the most surreal and highly entertaining experience of my life. I glanced at Harrison. His face remained perfectly composed, but I could clearly see the lethal amusement dancing in his sharp eyes. Is that so? Harrison asked, his voice laced with dangerous curiosity. You are personal friends with the CEO. That is quite a remarkable connection, DeAndre. He is known in the industry to be an incredibly private man who rarely associates with regional coordinators. He is not just a connection, he is a close personal mentor. DeAndre lied smoothly, gaining a false surge of confidence from Sabrina's unwavering public support. We have a direct line to each other. Whenever I need a multi-million-dollar deal approved, I bypass the entire executive board and go straight to him. We have that kind of mutual respect. He trusts my vision implicitly. Harrison nodded slowly, acting as if he were deeply impressed by this profound revelation. Well then, Harrison said, gesturing broadly with his hand toward the silent crowd. This seems like the perfect opportunity to clear up any lingering misunderstandings. Since you are such close personal friends with the CEO, and since you have his direct private line, why do you not call him right now? The smug, arrogant smile on DeAndre's face instantly vanished. The color drained from his cheeks once again, leaving him looking pale and sickly under the bright light of the crystal chandelier. Call him? DeAndre stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the grand room. Right now? Yes, right now. Harrison challenged, taking a single, highly intimidating step forward. You just claimed I am a nobody making up technical jargon. If you truly own this $4 million estate, and if the CEO truly mentored you through the acquisition, he will gladly verify your story to all of your esteemed guests. Go ahead, DeAndre. Give your good friend a call. DeAndre took a hesitant step backward, nervously wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. It is New Year's Eve, he argued weakly, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. The man is a billionaire. He is probably at an exclusive charity gala in Monaco or sailing on a private yacht. I am not going to bother him with petty family drama just to prove a point to an arrogant accountant. But my mother, Patricia, was not about to let the golden opportunity slip away. She saw this as the ultimate chance to put me in my place once and for all. Do it, DeAndre. Patricia demanded, her shrill voice echoing loudly across the grand foyer. Call him right now and put him on speakerphone. Let everyone in this room hear exactly how important you are. I am sick and tired of Gemma and this man coming into our family events and disrespecting your success. Call the CEO and shut them up permanently. Sabrina nodded vigorously, completely oblivious to her husband's internal panic. Yes, babe, call him. Show them who you really are. DeAndre was completely trapped. He looked at the tight circle of expectant faces surrounding him. The wealthy guests, my parents, his entitled wife. They were all waiting for him to prove his ultimate high society status. He had built his entire identity on this massive lie, and now he had absolutely nowhere left to run. With violently trembling hands, he reached into his velvet tuxedo jacket and slowly pulled out his sleek smartphone. He stared at the bright screen for a long, agonizing moment. I knew exactly what was happening in his panicked brain. He had saved a fake contact in his phone under the CEO's name just to show off to his friends at the bar. He likely intended to fake a voicemail or pretend the call went straight to an answering service to save face. He swallowed hard, unlocked the screen, and tapped the contact number. I am putting it on speakerphone, DeAndre announced, his voice shaking so badly he sounded like he was going to cry. He pressed the green call button and held the phone up high for the entire crowd to hear. The line rang once. It was loud, crisp, and clear through the phone's audio speaker. Simultaneously, a sharp, customized corporate ringtone began echoing loudly from the inside pocket of Harrison's midnight blue tuxedo jacket. The sound cut through the tense silence of the grand foyer like a blaring siren. Every single eye in the massive room darted away from DeAndre and locked directly onto Harrison. DeAndre froze completely. He stared at the midnight blue fabric of my husband's tailored suit, his eyes wide with a sudden and suffocating panic. His thumbs scrambled against the bright screen of his smartphone, hastily jabbing at the red end call button. The exact second he terminated the outgoing call, the customized corporate ringtone emanating from Harrison's pocket abruptly stopped. The grand foyer fell back into absolute agonizing silence. The only sound left in the room was the crackle of the stone fireplace and the shallow, rapid breathing of my brother-in-law. The coincidence was far too precise. It was too impossible to ignore. The wealthy guests standing around us began to exchange quiet, confused whispers. Some of the actual business owners in the crowd were already connecting the dots, their expressions shifting from polite curiosity to sharp, predatory amusement. I could practically see the gears grinding in DeAndre's mind as he tried to convince himself it was just a bizarre fluke, a network error, a crossed wire in the cellular towers. anything other than the terrifying reality standing right in front of him. He looked at his phone screen, swallowing so hard his throat clicked. With hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the device steady, DeAndre unlocked his screen and tapped the contact name for the CEO one more time. He held his breath, his terrified eyes fixed desperately on Harrison. The line rang out clearly on his speakerphone. A split second later, the sharp corporate ringtone blared from Harrison's jacket pocket once again. The synchronized sound echoed loudly off the imported marble floors. It was an undeniable, irrefutable confirmation of DeAndre's absolute worst nightmare. He was not just caught in a lie, he was caught by the one man on earth who had the power to destroy him completely. Sabrina, however, remained completely oblivious to the sheer gravity of what was happening. She lacked the basic financial literacy to understand the dynamic unfolding right in front of her. She crossed her arms tightly over her sequined silver dress and glared at Harrison. She huffed loudly, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder in a dramatic show of annoyance. "Excuse me," Sabrina snapped, her voice shrill and dripping with unearned entitlement. "Can you please silence your phone? My husband is trying to make an incredibly important business call to his billionaire mentor right now. Your cheap ringtone is completely ruining the moment. You are being incredibly rude. You need to have some basic respect for the people who actually own this house and pay your salary." My mother Patricia nodded in firm agreement, stepping up beside Sabrina to form a united front of absolute ignorance. "Turn the device off immediately," Patricia demanded, pointing a manicured finger at Harrison. "We are trying to conduct high-level family business here. If you cannot behave like a civilized guest, you and Gemma can leave right now." I stepped up right next to my husband, a slow and deeply satisfied smirk spreading across my face. I looked at Sabrina's irritated expression, then shifted my gaze to my mother, and finally rested my eyes on DeAndre. He currently looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows waiting for the lever to be pulled. "You should answer that, honey," I said, keeping my voice bright and highly conversational so the entire crowd could hear every single word. "It sounds like an important employee desperately needs your attention. Maybe it is a mid-level acquisitions coordinator calling about a clerical error regarding a shoreline zoning permit." Harrison offered me a brief, affectionate smile before reaching into his tailored jacket. He moved with slow, deliberate precision, a lion playing with a trapped mouse. He casually withdrew his sleek, high-end smartphone. The screen was glowing brightly in the dim light of the crystal chandelier. It was clearly displaying an incoming call from DeAndre's registered cellular number. Harrison did not break eye contact with DeAndre for a single second. The absolute dominance in his cold, calculating gaze pinned my brother-in-law to the floor. DeAndre looked like he was going to vomit. His knees were visibly trembling under his velvet tuxedo trousers. Harrison pressed the green accept button on his screen and slowly brought the phone up to his ear. The room held its collective breath. Nobody dared to move or make a sound. The two massive private security guards standing by the front door subtly shifted their weight, ready for any sudden movements. Harrison looked dead at DeAndre. His voice echoed perfectly in the silent room, and simultaneously it broadcasted through the speaker of DeAndre's phone for everyone to hear. "Hello, DeAndre," Harrison said, his tone perfectly flat and devoid of any mercy. "You are calling from my living room." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a thick, suffocating quiet that pressed down heavily on the grand foyer. No one moved. No one spoke. The live string quartet in the corner had completely packed away their instruments, sensing the impending disaster. The wealthy guests exchanged wide-eyed, shocked glances. The terrifying reality of the situation was settling over the room like a sudden winter freeze. But Sabrina, fueled by years of unchecked entitlement and a complete lack of financial understanding, absolutely refused to accept what was happening right in front of her face. She stomped her silver high heel against the imported Italian marble floor. "What kind of sick prank is this?" Sabrina shrieked, her voice echoing harshly off the vaulted ceilings. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at me. I know exactly what you did, Gemma. You downloaded some stupid caller ID spoofing application. You hired this cheap actor in a rented tuxedo and you set up a fake phone number to make it look like DeAndre was calling him. You are completely psychotic. My mother, Patricia, immediately marched forward to join her golden child. Her face was flushed with self-righteous fury. She glared at me with absolute hatred, completely ignoring the fact that half the room was already backing away from them. This is the most pathetic, jealous scheme you have ever pulled, Gemma. Patricia yelled, her voice trembling with rage. You could not stand the fact that your sister lives in a $4 million estate, so you orchestrated this elaborate hoax just to embarrass our family in front of DeAndre's important friends. You are going to apologize right now, or I swear I will have the valets throw you out into the snow. She turned her venom toward Harrison, pointing her finger directly at his chest. And as for you, she snarled, you are trespassing on private property. If you do not turn around and walk out that door immediately, I am calling the police and having you arrested. Harrison did not flinch. He did not look angry, nor did he look amused anymore. The polite, patient husband facade completely vanished in an instant, replaced entirely by the ruthless, calculating billionaire CEO who routinely dismantled massive global corporations before breakfast. He calmly pressed the red button on his smartphone, ending the active call. The sharp beep echoed loudly in the tense room. He slipped the device back into his tailored jacket pocket and took a single deliberate step forward. The sheer force of his presence made both Sabrina and Patricia instinctively stumble backward. Harrison raised his right hand and snapped his fingers once. The two massive private security guards, who had been standing quietly by the front double doors the entire time, immediately sprang into action. They marched directly into the center of the grand foyer, their expressions stone cold, standing shoulder to shoulder right behind Harrison. I am not going to stand here and argue with delusional people, Harrison said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding register that demanded absolute obedience from every single person in the room. My name is Harrison Wells. I am the founder and chief executive officer of the holding company that employs your husband, and I am the sole legal owner of this entire corporate retreat. He swept his cold, unforgiving gaze across the massive crowd of stunned guests' relatives and catering staff. The party is officially over, he announced, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate or negotiation. Every single person in this room has exactly 5 minutes to gather their coats and vacate my private property. Anyone found inside this house after that time will be forcibly removed and arrested for criminal trespassing by my security team. The guests gasped. Pure panic instantly rippled through the crowd. The wealthy socialites and actual business associates did not need to be told twice. They immediately recognized the undeniable authority in his voice and the very real threat of legal action. They turned in unison and began rushing toward the front coat check, desperate to distance themselves from the catastrophic family meltdown unfolding in the center of the room. Sabrina stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing in silent shock as she watched her perfect high society New Year's Eve party dissolve into absolute humiliating chaos. She turned to her husband, waiting for him to step up, defend their honor, and kick the arrogant intruder out. Tell them, DeAndre, she pleaded aggressively, grabbing his arm and shaking him. Tell them this is your house. Do something. But DeAndre was no longer pretending. The physical toll of the overwhelming realization had finally broken him. The heavy crystal champagne flute slipped from his violently trembling fingers. It hit the marble floor, shattering into dozens of sharp, glittering pieces. He did not even flinch at the loud sound. His knees completely buckled under his expensive velvet tuxedo trousers. He collapsed onto the floor right in the middle of the broken glass, entirely defeated. He looked up at my husband with wide, terrified eyes, his face completely drained of color. Mr. Wells. DeAndre stammered, his voice breaking into a pathetic, breathless sob. I did not know. You did not know? Harrison repeated, his voice echoing with chilling precision. Ignorance is a terrible defense for corporate fraud, DeAndre, especially when your signature is on every single forged document. Sabrina finally snapped out of her frozen state. She dropped to her knees right in the middle of the shattered crystal, completely ignoring the sharp glass shards tearing into her expensive silver-sequined dress. She grabbed DeAndre violently by the lapels of his velvet tuxedo jacket and shook him with all her strength. "DeAndre, get up!" Sabrina screamed, her face contorted with a mixture of panic and absolute fury. "Stop sitting there like a coward. Tell him he is lying. Call your security team and have these squatters thrown out of our house right now. Get up and fight back." But DeAndre could not fight back. He could barely even breathe. He was fully hyperventilating, his chest heaving violently as he gasped for thin air. He kept shaking his head, his eyes locked on the floor, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his exposure. The alpha male persona had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, broken man who had finally hit the bottom of his own bottomless pit of lies. "Stand up!" Sabrina demanded, her voice cracking as she yanked on his heavy jacket again. "You are a senior vice president. You own this estate. Prove it to them right now." Harrison watched the pathetic display for a moment before turning his attention to the massive 85-inch smart television mounted directly above the grand stone fireplace. He reached out his right hand, and one of the private security guards immediately placed a sleek silver iPad into his palm. Harrison tapped the screen twice. A second later, the massive television flickered to life, casting a bright, harsh white glow over the dimly lit room. "I think it is time we establish the actual facts," Harrison announced, his voice slicing cleanly through Sabrina's hysterical screaming. He swiped his finger across the iPad screen, wirelessly projecting a high-resolution corporate document directly onto the television for the remaining family members to see. The header of the document bore the bold, unmistakable logo of Harrison's holding company. Below it, printed in massive black letters, were the words, "Formal notice of immediate termination and criminal referral." DeAndre's full legal name was stamped right in the center of the page. Sabrina stopped shaking her husband. She slowly turned her head and stared up at the glowing screen, her mouth hanging open in silent horror. "This is a 40-page forensic audit compiled by my executive security team over the last 3 days," Harrison explained calmly, slowly scrolling through the dense pages of financial data and highlighted bank statements on the screen. "It details every single unauthorized transaction, forged signature, and falsified expense report DeAndre has submitted over the past 2 years. The private catering tonight, the designer clothes, the brand new Porsche sitting in the driveway, the diamond necklace you are currently wearing, Sabrina. All of it was purchased using stolen corporate funds routed through dummy shell accounts." My mother, Patricia, let out a loud, strangled gasp. She covered her mouth with both hands, stumbling backward until she hit the marble pillar. My father, Richard, looked like he was about to pass out, his face completely drained of blood. "And as for this beautiful $4 million estate," Harrison continued, his tone dripping with lethal sarcasm. DeAndre certainly did not buy it. He used a temporary administrative loophole in our employee portal to book this corporate retreat for a single weekend, claiming it was for an off-site team-building seminar. He even charged the massive security deposit to his corporate expense card. "It is a lie," Sabrina shrieked, tears of pure humiliation streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup. "You are faking these documents. DeAndre makes millions of dollars a year. He is on the executive board." Harrison did not argue. He simply smiled a cold, unforgiving smile and pinched the screen of his iPad, zooming in heavily on the final page of the employment dossier. The text on the massive television magnified until it was impossible for anyone in the room to misread. "Let us clear up his employment status right now," Harrison said, reading directly from the projected document. "DeAndre is not a senior vice president. He has never sat on an executive board. He is a mid-level acquisitions coordinator. His annual salary is exactly $65,000 before taxes." The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. $65,000. The man who had been parading around like a billionaire, treating my parents to lavish dinners and making grand speeches about immense wealth, barely made enough to rent a decent one-bedroom apartment in the city. But that is not even the best part, Harrison added, his voice dropping to a low, deadly whisper. He swiped to the very last page, revealing a massive, terrifying number highlighted in bright red ink. Because DeAndre has spent the last 3 years desperately trying to fund a fake high society lifestyle to impress his highly demanding wife and her greedy parents, he has taken out multiple illegal private loans. As of this morning, this mid-level coordinator is currently drowning in exactly $400,000 of secret high-interest debt. And that does not even include the money he embezzled from my company. That is a lie, Sabrina screamed, scrambling to her feet. Her silver heels slipped slightly on the marble floor, but she managed to catch her balance. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at the massive television screen. You typed that up yourself. You forged it just to embarrass us. You have always been jealous of me, Gemma. You have always wanted what I have, and you will do anything to ruin my perfect life. She aggressively shoved her left hand into the air, waving it frantically so the massive diamond engagement ring caught the bright light from the chandelier overhead. "Look at this ring!" Sabrina yelled, her voice raw and hysterical. "DeAndre bought this for me in cash. He bought the brand new Porsche parked right outside. He buys me designer clothes and luxury vacations because he is rich. He is a senior vice president, and you are just a bitter, lonely liar who had to hire a man to pretend to love you." I stepped completely out from behind my husband. The calm, polite sister they had bullied and belittled for decades was entirely gone. I looked at the golden child of the family, the sister who had made it her life mission to tear me down, and I felt nothing but absolute, undeniable triumph. "You have spent the last 10 years mocking my career, Sabrina," I said, my voice echoing with crystal-clear authority across the silent room. "You told our parents I was just a lowly paper pusher. You offered me a humiliating job as a receptionist tonight. But you never actually took the time to understand what a senior corporate liquidator does." My mother Patricia opened her mouth to speak, her face twisted in a mixture of anger and confusion, but the icy glare I shot her forced her into immediate silence. She finally realized she had absolutely no power in this room. I do not just file paperwork, I continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward my sister. I dismantle failing companies. I hunt down financial discrepancies, hidden debts, and complex corporate fraud. My entire career is dedicated to finding money that is missing and legally destroying the people who took it. And I am incredibly good at my job. Sabrina lowered her hand, her eyes darting nervously toward DeAndre, who was still kneeling on the floor, weeping silently into his hands. He looked like a pathetic, broken shell of the arrogant man he was just an hour ago. When DeAndre tried to run an unauthorized background check on me after our Christmas dinner, he triggered a massive security alert on Harrison's private executive servers, I explained, savoring every single word of the revelation. Harrison handed the alert directly to me. I am the one who audited DeAndre's department. I am the one who pulled his expense reports. I spent the last 3 days tearing apart his entire financial existence layer by layer. I pointed directly at the sparkling jewelry around her neck and on her fingers. "That massive diamond ring you are waving around in my face. It was purchased using a phantom vendor account that DeAndre cleverly disguised as a structural engineering firm. The silver sequined dress you are wearing right now was expensed to Harrison's company as international client entertainment." Sabrina gasped, taking a stumbling step back as if she had been physically struck by the words. "And that brand new Porsche Cayenne parked in the driveway," I asked, a cold, victorious smile forming on my lips. DeAndre did not drop 6 figures in cash on it. It is a corporate fleet vehicle registered to the Executive Transport Division. He literally stole a company car and handed you the keys, pretending it was a lavish gift. Every single thing you own, everything you are wearing, and everything you have bragged about to this family for the last 2 years is stolen corporate property. The grand foyer was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. My father Richard finally collapsed onto a nearby velvet bench, burying his face in his trembling hands. He realized his entire social standing was built on the back of a massive federal crime. Sabrina looked down at her husband. "Tell me she is lying." "DeAndre," she whispered, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated desperation. "Please tell me she is lying to us." But DeAndre did not look up. He just shook his head slowly, tears dripping onto the expensive imported marble floor. The crushing reality finally hit her. The golden child realized her entire glamorous life was nothing but a criminal fantasy. She was not a wealthy socialite. She was the clueless wife of a desperate broke thief. "But the absolute worst part is not that you are completely broke, Sabrina," I said softly, delivering the final devastating blow to her ego. "The worst part is what happens next. Because corporate fraud and embezzlement of this magnitude is a major federal offense." Just as the words left my mouth, a faint, high-pitched wailing sound cut through the freezing night air outside. It was faint at first, but it was growing rapidly louder by the second. Bright flashes of red and blue lights began to reflect faintly against the distant trees lining the long driveway. The sirens were approaching the Hamptons estate, and they were coming fast. The bright flashes of red and blue lights swept across the soaring floor-to-ceiling windows of the grand foyer. The rhythmic, strobing colors painted the terrified faces of my family members in harsh, unforgiving tones. The wailing of the sirens grew deafeningly loud before abruptly cutting off, replaced by the heavy crunch of gravel as multiple police cruisers slammed into park right outside the front doors. The crushing reality of the situation finally settled over the room. The fake wealth was entirely gone, evaporated into thin air, and the authorities were literally steps away. My mother Patricia stood frozen for only a fraction of a second. I watched the gears turning violently in her head. Her entire social standing, her arrogant pride, and her absolute worship of DeAndre had just been publicly obliterated. She realized instantly that she was standing on a rapidly sinking ship, and true to her narcissistic nature, she immediately looked for someone else to throw overboard. Patricia marched across the marble floor, her high heels clicking sharply. She stopped right in front of DeAndre, who was still kneeling in the shattered crystal. Without a single word of warning, she raised her hand and slapped him across the face with all the strength she could muster. The sharp crack echoed loudly through the silent room. "You disgusting, lying criminal!" Patricia screamed, her voice completely devoid of the sweet, adoring tone she had used with him just an hour ago. "How dare you bring your filthy, stolen money into our family? You manipulated us. You tricked my beautiful, innocent daughter into marrying a broke, pathetic fraud. You promised us an empire, and you gave us nothing but lies and federal charges." DeAndre recoiled, clutching his stinging cheek. He looked up at my mother with wide, betrayed eyes. "Patricia," he stammered, his voice trembling, "you knew I was struggling. You told me to do whatever it takes to keep up appearances." "Shut your mouth!" Patricia shrieked, entirely frantic now. She turned around and grabbed Sabrina by the arm, roughly pulling her crying golden child away from the broken man on the floor. Patricia dragged Sabrina directly over to where Harrison and I were standing. Her face morphed instantly from absolute fury to desperate pleading victimhood. "Gemma, please," Patricia begged, her voice cracking with forced emotion. "You have to help us. You have to protect your sister." She had no idea he was doing this. "She is completely innocent. He manipulated all of us with his slick words and his stolen cars. You and Harrison have so much power and money. Please tell the police this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Do not let them take my baby girl down with this pathetic thug. We are your family, Gemma. You have to save us." I stared at the woman who not even 30 minutes ago had threatened to sue me for my grandmother's cabin and tried to physically rip my purse from my hands. The sheer hypocrisy of her plea was staggering. I slowly crossed my arms, my expression remaining completely cold and detached. "You are not my family," I replied softly. "You are just a group of people who share my DNA, and I am not protecting anyone from the consequences of their own blinding greed." Behind us, a dark, bitter laugh broke through the tension. It was a low, hollow sound that quickly escalated into a manic chuckle. We all turned back to look at DeAndre. He slowly pushed himself up from the floor, ignoring the shards of glass clinging to his velvet trousers. The sheer terror in his eyes had been completely replaced by a cold, spiteful fury. He realized his perfect wife and his adoring mother-in-law were throwing him straight to the wolves to save their own skin. "You think I'm going down for this alone?" DeAndre sneered, his voice shaking with venom as he glared directly at Patricia. "You think you get to play the innocent, manipulated victim after everything you forced me to do?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out his smartphone. He wiped a streak of sweat from his phone screen and tapped a few buttons. "I am facing federal prison," Patricia DeAndre growled, taking a step toward her. "But if I am sinking, I am dragging you straight down to the bottom with me." He turned the volume on his phone all the way up and pressed play on a saved voice recording. My mother's shrill, unmistakable voice instantly filled the quiet room. "DeAndre, I need you to wire another $20,000 into my account by Tuesday," the recorded voice of Patricia demanded. "The country club ladies are getting suspicious, and my bookie is threatening to come to the house. Just take it from that commercial acquisition fund again. Nobody notices when you move that corporate money around. Do it, or I will tell Sabrina about the massive loan you took out for her wedding ring." Patricia let out a horrified, breathless gasp. All the color drained from her face as the recording exposed her ultimate, unforgivable betrayal. She was not a victim. She was the architect of his financial ruin. Before Patricia could even attempt to formulate a pathetic excuse for the damning audio recording, the heavy oak double doors of the grand foyer were violently pushed open. The freezing night air rushed into the room, accompanied by the blinding glare of red and blue police lights. Half a dozen uniformed officers and two plainclothes detectives strode confidently onto the imported Italian marble floors. Their heavy boots echoed loudly against the stone, shattering whatever was left of the high society illusion my family had tried so desperately to build. The lead detective, a tall man with a stern face and a thick winter coat, held up a folded legal document. He scanned the terrified faces in the room before locking his eyes directly onto the man kneeling in the shattered crystal. DeAndre the detective announced, his voice booming with undeniable authority. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of felony wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and grand larceny. Stand up and place your hands behind your back." The remaining guests, the ones who had not managed to escape before the police arrived, pressed themselves against the walls in absolute horror. They watched in stunned silence as the wealthy real estate mogul they had been admiring all night was reduced to a common criminal. DeAndre did not try to run. He did not try to fight. He was completely broken. He slowly pushed himself up from the floor, holding his wrists out in front of him like a defeated man accepting his final execution. An officer stepped forward, roughly grabbed DeAndre by the arms and spun him around. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the silent grand foyer. It was the distinct sound of an entire fake empire permanently crashing to the ground. Sabrina watched her husband being shackled, but her reaction was not one of a loving, devastated wife. Instead of rushing to his side or begging the police for mercy, her mind immediately shifted to pure, selfish self-preservation. She realized the money was gone, the house was a lie, and the police were about to seize absolutely everything. She spun around, her eyes darting wildly, and bolted toward the back hallway that led to the master suite. She reappeared a minute later, frantically rushing toward the rear patio doors. She was struggling to balance three massive, wildly expensive designer handbags on her arms, including a rare Himalayan crocodile Birkin that cost more than a luxury sedan. She was trying to sneak out through the gardens to save the only things she actually cared about. But Harrison had anticipated her exact move. He had already informed the authorities about the stolen corporate assets decorating my sister's body. As Sabrina grabbed the brass handle of the patio door, two female officers stepped out from the shadows of the hallway and physically blocked her path. "Where do you think you are going?" one of the officers asked, stepping firmly into Sabrina's personal space. "I am leaving!" Sabrina shrieked, clutching the leather bags tightly to her chest. "These belong to me. They are personal gifts. You have no right to keep me here. Get out of my way right now." The officer did not flinch. She reached out and grabbed the strap of the Birkin bag. "Actually, ma'am, every single luxury item on your person was purchased using stolen corporate funds. They are officially classified as evidence in a federal embezzlement case. Hand them over immediately, or you will be arrested for obstruction of justice and possession of stolen property." Sabrina fought back, tugging desperately at the bags like a spoiled child refusing to share a toy. "No," she sobbed, her flawless makeup now completely ruined by heavy streaks of black mascara. "You cannot take them. They are mine. I am a victim here. I did not know he was stealing anything." The officers were completely unmoved by her theatrical tears. They forcefully stripped the designer bags from her arms. Then the lead detective walked over and pointed directly at her chest. "I will need the diamond necklace and the engagement ring too, ma'am," he stated coldly. "Take them off. Now." Sabrina wailed in pure agony as she was forced to unhook the massive diamond necklace and slide the heavy engagement ring off her finger, dropping them into a clear plastic evidence bag. She collapsed onto the floor, weeping hysterically over the loss of her shiny objects, completely ignoring the fact that her husband was being marched toward a police cruiser. DeAndre stopped walking. He looked back over his shoulder at his wife, who was crying over a confiscated purse instead of him. The utter lack of loyalty finally pushed him over the edge. "You only care about the money," DeAndre screamed, his voice cracking with venom, as the officers pulled him toward the door. "You never cared about me. You are just as greedy as your mother. Do you want to know the real reason I married you, Sabrina? Do you want to know the absolute truth?" Sabrina looked up, her face twisted in confusion and utter despair. "I did not even like you." DeAndre yelled, his words hitting her like physical blows. "I only proposed to you because Patricia promised me a massive cut of your grandmother's property. They were planning to forge the legal documents to steal the cabin from Gemma, and they needed my help to launder the sale money. I married you for a real estate scam that your own mother orchestrated." Before Sabrina could even process the devastating reality that her entire marriage was a fraudulent business transaction arranged by her own mother, the officers shoved DeAndre through the front doors and out into the freezing night. The moment the heavy oak doors slammed shut behind the police, absolute panic erupted among the remaining guests. The wealthy socialites, business associates, and extended family members scrambled toward the coat check like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Nobody wanted to be associated with a federal raid. Women in expensive gowns pushed past each other, abandoning half-eaten plates of caviar and crystal glasses of champagne. The valets outside were completely overwhelmed as dozens of luxury cars peeled out of the long gravel driveway, their headlights cutting through the freezing winter night. Within less than 5 minutes, the massive $4 million corporate retreat was completely empty. The grand foyer looked like the aftermath of a hurricane. The catering staff had vanished out the back door to avoid questioning. Shattered glass covered the imported Italian marble floor. Only 5 people remained in the cavernous, dead-silent room. Harrison and I stood firmly near the front entrance. Sabrina was still crumpled on the floor, weeping hysterically over her empty wrists and ruined reputation. My mother, Patricia, was leaning heavily against a stone pillar, staring blankly at the wall, looking as if she had aged 20 years in a single hour. My father, Richard, who had spent the entire evening bragging to his friends about his son-in-law, finally stood up from the velvet bench. He nervously smoothed down his tie and walked slowly toward Harrison and me. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the authoritative fatherly voice he always used to control me. "Gemma, please." Richard pleaded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and desperation. "This is a complete disaster. The family name is going to be dragged through the mud. It will be on the front page of every local paper by tomorrow morning. You have to help us fix this. Harrison has billions of dollars. He owns this entire company. Just use his money to bail DeAndre out tonight, pay off whatever stolen funds are missing, and make these federal charges go away. We cannot survive a public scandal like this. We are your family." I stared at the man who had called me a bitter disappointment just hours earlier. I let out a sharp, echoing laugh that sent a chill through the quiet room. The sound was completely devoid of any warmth or humor. It was the sound of a woman who had finally severed every single emotional tie to the people standing in front of her. "Bail him out," I asked, my voice slicing cleanly through the thick tension. "You want my husband to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to rescue a man who actively stole from him? A man who married your daughter solely as part of a real estate scam to steal my inheritance? You must be completely out of your mind." Richard took a step back, shocked by the absolute venom in my tone. "But Gemma, you have the resources." "Now," he stammered. "I do not owe you a single dime," I fired back, stepping forward and closing the distance between us. "For 32 years, you and Patricia treated me like an emotional punching bag. You forced me to live in the shadow of a sister who has never achieved a single honest thing in her entire life. You belittled my career, mocked my appearance, and isolated me at every family gathering. You treated me like a bank when it was convenient and a burden the rest of the time." I turned my furious gaze toward my mother. "You secretly took out a $40,000 student loan in my name to pay for Sabrina to have a lavish wedding to a con artist. You demanded I pay a massive dinner bill on Christmas Eve because you thought I was just a pathetic spinster who should be grateful for an invitation to her own family dinner. And tonight, you threatened to drag me into probate court to steal my dead grandmother's cabin, the only place I ever felt safe. You were going to bulldoze her memory just to fund DeAndre's fake lifestyle." Patricia squeezed her eyes shut, unable to even look at me. Sabrina continued to sob loudly on the floor, completely broken. I reached into my emerald evening gown's matching designer clutch and pulled out a thick sealed manila envelope. "I did not just come here tonight to watch DeAndre get arrested," I announced, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "I came here to finalize my exit from this toxic nightmare." I walked over and forcefully slapped the heavy envelope directly against Patricia's chest. She instinctively grabbed it with shaking hands. "What is this?" Patricia whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "That is an itemized bill," I stated coldly. "It covers the original $40,000 student loan you fraudulently took out in my name, plus 12 years of aggressively accrued interest. It also includes the expensive legal fees I incurred this week while moving my grandmother's cabin into an ironclad, untouchable trust fund protected by Harrison's corporate lawyers. You have 30 days to pay that balance in full, or my legal team will file civil fraud charges against you." Patricia gasped, dropping the envelope onto the marble floor as if it had burned her hands. I pulled a second crisp white document from my clutch and dropped it directly on top of the envelope. "And that," I added with absolute finality, "is a legally binding cease and desist order. It explicitly prevents you, Richard and Sabrina, from ever calling, texting, emailing, or approaching me again. If you violate it, I will have you arrested for harassment. We are completely done." The silence that followed my final declaration was absolute. Patricia stared down at the crisp legal documents resting on the marble floor, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Richard opened his mouth to argue, to try and leverage some lingering sense of familial duty, but Harrison did not give him the chance. My husband raised his hand, gesturing sharply to the massive private security guards standing near the entrance. "Escort them off the property," Harrison commanded, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "Make sure they do not take anything that does not belong to them." The two guards stepped forward immediately. Their imposing physical presence broke the spell of shock that had paralyzed my family. One guard firmly grasped Richard by the arm, guiding the stunned man toward the front entrance. The other guard stepped toward my mother, who scrambled backward, her high heels slipping on the scattered glass. She bent down, snatching the legal documents off the floor, as if they were a lifeline, before letting the guard direct her toward the massive doors. But Sabrina was not going quietly. The reality of the freezing December night waiting for her outside finally pierced through her hysterical sobbing. She scrambled to her feet, her ruined silver-sequined dress clinging to her shivering frame. She lunged forward, desperately trying to bypass the security guards to reach me. "Gemma, wait!" Sabrina cried out, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "You cannot throw me out right now. It is 20 degrees outside. The police took all of my money. They took my car. I do not have a ride back to the city. I do not even have a winter coat because it was in the trunk of the Porsche. I stood next to Harrison, completely unmoved by her sudden panic. "You have a phone, Sabrina," I said flatly. "Call a cab, call a ride service. I really do not care how you get back to whatever apartment you actually live in." "That is just it," Sabrina sobbed, tears cutting fresh tracks through her ruined makeup. "I do not have an apartment to go back to. We got evicted a month ago. Our landlord foreclosed on the lease because DeAndre stopped paying the rent. We have been living out of expensive hotel rooms that he paid for with that stolen corporate card. We packed all of our remaining clothes into the trunk of that car tonight. We were planning on living here." The sheer entitlement of her confession was staggering. They had lost their home due to their own reckless spending, and their grand master plan was to secretly squat in a $4 million corporate retreat owned by my husband. She had no backup plan, no savings, and no safety net left to catch her. "Please, Gemma," Sabrina begged, dropping all pretenses of pride. "Just let me stay here for one night. Just until the morning. I promise I will figure something out tomorrow. I will sleep on the floor. I will do whatever you want. Please do not make me sleep outside in the freezing cold. I am your sister." I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life trying to destroy my self-esteem. The woman who had just mocked my career, insulted my husband, and tried to steal my only inheritance. I felt absolutely no pity. Not a single drop of sympathy existed in my heart for her. "You should have thought about that before you helped orchestrate a scam to steal my grandmother's cabin," I replied, my voice as cold as the winter wind howling outside the mansion. "You dug this hole, Sabrina. Now you get to sleep in it." The security guards did not wait for another order. They stepped forward, grabbed Sabrina by the arms, and physically marched her toward the grand foyer entrance. She kicked and screamed, thrashing wildly against their iron grip, but her efforts were completely useless. They dragged her through the entryway, out into the bitter cold, and released her onto the front steps alongside our parents. Sabrina spun around, her face twisted in pure desperation, reaching out for the brass handle. I stepped forward and grabbed the heavy oak door. I looked her dead in the eye one last time. "Goodbye, Sabrina," I said. I slammed the grand oak doors completely shut, cutting off her hysterical screaming. The heavy click of the deadbolt locking into place echoed through the empty foyer. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Harrison wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. We walked over to the soaring floor-to-ceiling windows facing the front driveway. The landscape lights illuminated the freezing scene outside. Without their stolen Porsche, and without the warm shelter of their fake empire, the toxic family dynamic instantly imploded. Through the thick glass, I watched as Patricia immediately turned on Sabrina. The loving, protective mother facade completely vanished. Patricia began viciously screaming at her golden child, wildly gesturing and blaming Sabrina for marrying a criminal and ruining the family name. Sabrina screamed right back, pointing her finger at Patricia's face, blaming her mother for orchestrating the real estate scam and encouraging DeAndre's fake lifestyle. Richard just stood helplessly in the background, rubbing his temples as his wife and daughter tore each other apart in the icy driveway. They had absolutely nothing left but their own toxic venom, and now they were finally turning it on each other. 1 week later, the dust from the catastrophic New Year's Eve party had barely begun to settle, but the fallout was already apocalyptic. The legal system moved with terrifying speed when a billionaire CEO pressed charges. DeAndre had his arraignment hearing on a freezing Monday morning. I did not attend, but Harrison's legal team provided me with a highly detailed transcript. The federal judge took one look at the overwhelming mountain of forensic evidence I had compiled. Factoring in his $400,000 of hidden debt and his history of falsifying corporate documents, the judge declared DeAndre a severe flight risk. Bail was aggressively denied. The man who had strutted around a $4 million mansion in a velvet tuxedo was now sitting in a cold, concrete federal holding cell wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. Sabrina was completely stranded. With all of her bank accounts frozen by the authorities and her designer assets seized, as evidence she had absolutely no access to money. Her wealthy socialite friends entirely abandoned her, refusing to answer her frantic phone calls. She was ultimately forced to sleep on the lumpy sofa of a reluctant former college roommate who only took her in out of morbid pity. My mother, Patricia, however, refused to accept reality. The brutal public humiliation of having her golden family exposed as a complete fraud was destroying her fragile, carefully curated country club reputation. She was frantically trying to hire a high-powered defense attorney to bail DeAndre out and somehow salvage their shattered image. But high-profile criminal defense lawyers required massive cash retainers up front, and my parents were already drowning in their own suffocating credit card debt. They had no liquid cash. Desperation breeds incredible stupidity. On a quiet Tuesday morning, my phone vibrated on my desk. It was the lead attorney for Harrison's private family trust. He called to inform me of a highly entertaining development. Patricia had just walked into a local real estate brokerage firm in our hometown. She was actively attempting to secure a rapid cash sale for my grandmother's cabin. Patricia actually thought she could outsmart me. She assumed that because she had kept an old, outdated copy of the original property deed in her home filing cabinet, she could simply forge my signature on a transfer of ownership document. Her master plan was incredibly transparent. She wanted to sell the property right out from under me, pocket the massive cash payout pay for DeAndre's legal defense, and leave me with absolutely nothing. She believed she was a genius playing a game of chess against a child. But Patricia forgot who she was dealing with. I am a senior corporate liquidator. Anticipating financial betrayal is literally my job description. The very morning after our disastrous Christmas dinner, when Patricia had first threatened to take the cabin, I took immediate, ruthless action. I authorized Harrison's elite legal team to completely restructure the ownership of the property. The deed to my grandmother's cabin was immediately transferred into an ironclad, impenetrable private corporate trust. The property was no longer legally registered under my individual name. It belonged to an entity that required multi-signature biometric authentication from both Harrison and me just to alter a single tax record. When the eager real estate broker took Patricia's forged documents and ran a standard title search to process the rapid sale, the digital system immediately flagged a massive, catastrophic discrepancy. The name on the forged signature did not match the corporate entity that currently owned the land. The automated security protocols of the trust were triggered instantly, sending a direct alert to the state authorities regarding an attempted fraudulent real estate transaction. By Wednesday afternoon, Patricia was sitting comfortably in the broker's plush office lobby, sipping a complimentary coffee and expecting to walk out with a massive cashier's check. Instead, two stern state financial investigators walked straight through the glass doors. The broker, eager to avoid any legal liability for his firm, handed Patricia's forged paperwork directly over to the investigators. Patricia was caught entirely red-handed. The blood drained from her face as she looked at the undeniable proof of her crime resting in the investigator's hand. Forging a legal signature on a binding real estate document to illegally liquidate property was not a minor mistake. It was a severe state felony. She had tried to steal my only sacred inheritance to save a lying scam artist, and in doing so, she had walked completely blindfolded into a massive, inescapable legal trap of her own making. The woman who had spent her entire adult life obsessing over her pristine public image and judging everyone else was now facing imminent criminal charges. As the investigators read her rights right there in the lobby, Patricia finally realized that her insatiable greed had become her ultimate permanent prison. The news of Patricia being arrested in the lobby of a real estate brokerage spread through our hometown faster than a wildfire. It was impossible to keep quiet. By Thursday morning, the local newspaper ran a massive front-page story detailing the entire catastrophic saga. The headline exposed everything linking a prominent local family to a massive corporate embezzlement scandal, federal wire fraud, and a botched attempt to forge real estate documents. The article did not use our names directly due to the ongoing investigation. But in a wealthy, gossip-fueled suburban town, everyone knew exactly who the article was about. The social execution of my parents was absolute and immediate. The extended family, the same aunts, uncles, and cousins who had sat at that mahogany dining table on Christmas Eve and laughed at my expense, completely severed all ties. When Richard desperately called his own brother asking for a short-term loan to help cover Patricia's mounting legal fees, his brother simply hung up the phone. My parents were entirely excommunicated. The prestigious country club they had spent decades sucking up to officially revoked their membership via a cold two-sentence email. Patricia was out on bail, but she was entirely trapped inside her own home, too mortified to even walk down her own driveway to check the mail. Sabrina, however, was still desperately fighting to maintain her status as the ultimate victim. Refusing to accept that her free ride was permanently over, she decided to weaponize her tears for the internet. On a Sunday afternoon, she launched a crowdfunding campaign online. She posted a heavily edited video of herself sitting on her former roommate's cheap sofa, wearing a plain gray sweatshirt, crying hysterically without a drop of makeup on her face. In the video, Sabrina spun a masterful web of absolute lies. She claimed she had been severely financially abused by DeAndre, completely unaware of his crimes. She told the internet that she had been thrown out into the freezing cold by a ruthless billionaire brother-in-law and a jealous, vindictive sister who wanted to see her suffer. She set the donation goal at $50,000, begging the public to help an innocent woman rebuild her shattered life from scratch. It was a brilliant performance designed to manipulate the sympathies of strangers. Within 30 minutes, a few $100s had already trickled into the account from unsuspecting donors. But Sabrina had severely underestimated the watchful eyes of the people she was trying to slander. I did not even have to lift a single finger to stop her. Harrison's corporate legal team had been monitoring all digital activity related to the federal embezzlement case to protect the company's public image. They spotted Sabrina's fraudulent crowdfunding campaign almost immediately. The lead corporate attorney drafted a swift, razor-sharp legal notice directly to the hosting platform. The notice provided the active federal case numbers, proving that Sabrina was soliciting public funds under wildly false pretenses and attempting to profit off a situation actively tied to stolen corporate assets. The platform's fraud department took one look at the overwhelming legal evidence and pulled the plug. Sabrina's campaign was completely nuked from the internet in exactly 45 minutes. Every single donated dollar was automatically refunded, and her account was permanently banned for violating the terms of service regarding fraudulent solicitation. With no husband, no home, no family support, and her digital panhandling scheme completely destroyed, Sabrina finally hit absolute rock bottom. The golden child was forced to enter the real world. Having no college degree, zero marketable skills, a massive gap in her resume, and a name heavily associated with a publicized federal crime, nobody in the corporate sector would even look at her application. By the end of the month, Sabrina had to take the only job that would hire her. She became a minimum wage cashier at a brightly lit, deeply depressing discount retail store in a strip mall. The woman who had worn custom silk gowns and a massive stolen diamond ring was now forced to wear a stiff polyester blue vest and a plastic name tag. She spent her days scanning cheap merchandise, cleaning up spilled soda in the aisles, and being screamed at by angry customers over expired coupons. It was the exact type of honest, grueling labor she had spent her entire life mocking me for doing. One evening, as I was sitting in the quiet luxury of my penthouse living room, my phone buzzed with a text from an unsaved number. I opened the message. It was a massive, rambling paragraph from Sabrina. She told me her feet were bleeding from standing all day. She begged for my forgiveness. She admitted she had been horrible to me our entire lives and pleaded for just one more chance, asking if Harrison could give her a small administrative job at his company so she could afford to eat. I read the long, desperate apology from top to bottom. 10 years ago, a message like that would have made me cry. I would have rushed to rescue her. But now, sitting in the beautiful, peaceful life I had built for myself, I looked at the words on the screen and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even a sense of triumph. Just pure, hollow indifference. I did not type a single word in response. I simply hit the delete button, blocked the number, and set my phone back down on the marble table. 2 days later, Harrison and I packed the back of his heavy-duty sports utility vehicle with power tools, cleaning supplies, and thick winter blankets. We drove 3 hours north, leaving the chaotic, suffocating noise of Manhattan far behind us. We were heading to the only place in the world that had ever felt like a true home to me: my grandmother's cabin. The property sat quietly at the end of a long, winding dirt road surrounded by towering, snow-covered pine trees. It was a modest single-story wooden structure with a wraparound porch and a stone chimney. It was entirely unpretentious and rustic. It was the exact opposite of the flashy, sterile $4 million corporate mansion DeAndre and Sabrina had tried to claim as their own. We walked up the wooden steps, the snow crunching loudly under our heavy winter boots. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of aged cedar wood and old fireplace ash. We spent the entire weekend wearing faded jeans and heavy flannel shirts, working side by side to breathe new life into the neglected space. We ripped out the old dusty carpets, tore down the peeling floral wallpaper, and scrubbed the massive stone fireplace until it looked brand new. The physical labor was incredibly therapeutic. With every swing of the hammer and every piece of rotting wood we threw into the dumpster, it felt like I was physically breaking the heavy chains that had tied me to my toxic past. We were taking a place that my mother had tried to weaponize against me and turning it into an untouchable sanctuary for our future. But healing is rarely a perfectly linear process. Late Saturday afternoon, while I was kneeling in the hallway clearing out a bottom kitchen cabinet, I found a small, faded ceramic mug. It was the exact mug my grandmother used to serve me hot chocolate in when I was a little girl hiding from my parents' screaming matches. The moment my fingers brushed the cold ceramic, a sudden and completely overwhelming wave of emotion hit my chest. My vision blurred. I sank to the dusty wooden floorboards, clutching the small mug tightly to my chest, and began to cry. It was not a loud, hysterical, theatrical sob like the ones Sabrina constantly used to get her way. It was a quiet, profound, and deeply agonizing mourning. Harrison heard me crying from the other room. He immediately dropped his heavy crowbar, rushed into the kitchen, and knelt down on the dusty floor right beside me. He did not ask what was wrong or tell me to stop crying. He simply wrapped his strong arms around my shoulders and pulled me against his chest, letting me feel the absolute safety of his presence. "I am so sorry," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I am not crying because I miss them. I am not sad that I lost my mother or my sister. I am just grieving a ghost. I am grieving the illusion of the family I always wanted but never actually had. I spent 32 years trying to earn the love of people who only ever saw me as an ATM and a punching bag." Harrison kissed the top of my head, holding me even tighter. "You have absolutely nothing to apologize for, Gemma," he said, his deep voice vibrating against my back. "You are mourning the parents you deserved, not the parents you received. But you need to remember that blood is just biology. Blood does not equal loyalty, and it certainly does not equal love. You have a real family now. You have me. And we are going to fill this cabin with people who actually cherish you." His words washed over me slowly, extinguishing the lingering pain in my chest. I took a deep, steadying breath, wiped my face with the back of my flannel sleeve, and nodded. I placed the ceramic mug safely on the kitchen counter, and we went back to work. An hour later, we moved into the master bedroom to begin pulling up the warped, water-damaged floorboards near the back window. Harrison wedged his heavy steel crowbar under a particularly stubborn oak plank. He pushed down hard. The thick wood snapped with a loud, echoing crack, exposing the dark, hollow cavity between the floor joists. Harrison suddenly paused, shining his flashlight down into the dusty opening. "Look at this," he murmured, reaching his hand deep into the floor. He pulled out a small, tarnished metal tin box. It was completely covered in decades of dust and sealed with a heavy piece of tape. We sat cross-legged on the floor together and carefully pried the metal lid open. Inside rested a single neatly folded piece of thick stationery paper and a heavy vintage brass key. I carefully unfolded the paper. My heart skipped a beat. It was written in my grandmother's unmistakable, elegant cursive handwriting. The date inked at the top proved she had written it exactly 1 week before she passed away. My dearest Gemma, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means you finally claimed this cabin and broke away from your parents. I always knew you were the only genuinely strong one in this family. I always knew Patricia's blinding greed and Richard's cowardice would eventually ruin them. That is why I left the cabin solely to you, safe from their grasping hands. But the cabin is not the only thing I left you. Take this brass key to the First National Bank in the city. It is time you finally received your true inheritance. Take this brass key to the First National Bank in the city. It is time you finally received your true inheritance. I stared at the elegant cursive handwriting, the weight of the heavy brass key pressing into the palm of my hand. Harrison leaned over my shoulder, reading the final line of the letter. He looked at me, a soft, encouraging smile on his face. Well, he said quietly, it looks like we have an errand to run in the city on Monday morning. We drove back to Manhattan the next day. First National Bank was an imposing historical building in the financial district with towering marble columns and heavy bronze doors. We bypassed the standard teller lines and were immediately escorted into the private wealth management wing. The senior vault manager, a distinguished older man in a gray suit, reviewed my identification and the notarized death certificate I had brought along. He recognized the vintage brass key immediately, his demeanor shifting to one of deep, quiet respect. He led us down into the subterranean levels of the bank, navigating through thick steel doors until we reached the private vault room. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with thousands of polished steel safety deposit boxes. The manager inserted his master key into box number 412, and I slid my grandmother's brass key into the secondary slot. We turned them simultaneously. The heavy metal door clicked open with a satisfying echoing sound. Inside the narrow compartment rested a single thick leather portfolio. It looked incredibly old, the edges worn smooth by time and careful handling. I pulled it out, carried it over to the private viewing table in the center of the room, and carefully unzipped the top. There were no gold bars or stacks of cash inside. Instead, the portfolio was packed tightly with crisp vintage paper documents. I pulled out the first stack. They were original paper stock certificates. My grandmother had purchased them decades ago, long before digital trading existed. I recognized the company names printed across the top of the certificates immediately. They were foundational shares in a major multinational telecommunications conglomerate and a highly successful pharmaceutical giant. Harrison, who spent his entire life analyzing corporate valuations, carefully picked up one of the certificates. He scanned the issuance date and the volume of shares listed. His eyes widened slightly, a rare expression of genuine surprise for a man who managed billions. Gemma, he said, his voice laced with profound respect. Do you have any idea what these are worth today? I shook my head, my hands trembling slightly as I looked at the massive stack of paper. My grandmother had lived such a simple, frugal life. She drove an old sedan and lived in a rustic wooden cabin. I had always assumed she survived on a modest fixed pension. Harrison pulled out his phone, quickly multiplying the original share counts by the decades of aggressive stock splits and compound dividends. Darling, he announced, looking up at me. With current market valuations, this portfolio is worth just over $8 million. And according to this legal transfer document attached to the back, every single share was placed in an irrevocable trust assigned exclusively to you upon her death. I had to sit down in one of the leather chairs. $8 million. My mother and my sister had spent their entire lives obsessing over the appearance of wealth. They had destroyed their family, committed federal felonies, and ruined their own lives just to pretend they had money. Patricia had risked a state prison sentence to forge documents for a wooden cabin she thought was worth a few $100,000, completely oblivious to the fact that a multi-million-dollar fortune was sitting quietly in a bank vault waiting for me. Their greed had blinded them entirely. Their attempts to ruin me and steal my inheritance had only propelled me toward greater success. "What are you going to do with it?" Harrison asked gently, taking the seat next to me and holding my hand. I looked at the vintage certificates. I did not need the money. I had a highly successful career as a senior corporate liquidator, and my husband was a billionaire. I was completely financially secure. But I thought about the thousands of women who were not. Women who were trapped in toxic families, controlled by narcissistic parents, or held hostage by financially abusive partners. Women who did not have a black card or a corporate lawyer to save them. "I want to start a foundation," I said, the vision crystallizing perfectly in my mind. "I want to build a legal and financial advocacy center for women escaping domestic and familial financial abuse. I want to use my grandmother's money to dismantle the exact kind of control my parents tried to use on me." Harrison smiled, his eyes shining with absolute pride. "I will have my legal team draft the foundational paperwork this afternoon," he promised. 2 days later, I sat in the sprawling glass boardroom of Harrison's corporate headquarters. A massive stack of legal documents rested on the mahogany table in front of me, officially establishing the charitable foundation. The lead attorney handed me a sleek silver pen. "Just sign on the dotted line, Mrs. Wells," he instructed politely. I looked down at the signature line. For 32 years, my maiden name had been a heavy, suffocating chain tying me to a family that never truly loved me. I pressed the pen to the paper. With swift, confident strokes, I signed my legal married name, Gemma Wells. In that single, definitive motion, I permanently shed the toxic legacy of my parents and claimed my absolute freedom. Exactly 1 year later, the world outside was blanketed in a thick layer of pristine white snow. It was Christmas Eve, the exact anniversary of the night my old life began to violently unravel. But as I stood in the center of the newly renovated kitchen of my grandmother's cabin, the air felt completely different. The heavy, suffocating tension that used to define the holidays was entirely gone. In its place was the rich, comforting scent of roasted rosemary, fresh pine needles, and the joyous sound of genuine laughter echoing off the warm cedar walls. Harrison came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin softly on my shoulder. He handed me a crystal glass of sparkling cider and kissed my cheek. "Everything looks absolutely perfect, Mrs. Wells," he murmured, looking out at the crowded living room. I leaned back into his embrace, a deep sense of peace washing over me. We had spent the last 12 months transforming this rustic cabin into a stunning, expansive winter sanctuary. We knocked down walls to create a massive open-concept dining space, installed floor-to-ceiling windows to overlook the frozen lake, and built a massive stone hearth that was currently roaring with a warm, crackling fire. But the most beautiful part of the room was not the architecture. It was the people standing inside it. There were 20 guests gathered around the long handmade wooden dining table. But unlike last year, there was no toxic hierarchy. No one was screaming about who paid for the food. No one was wearing stolen diamond necklaces or bragging about fake real estate portfolios to cover up their crushing secret debt. There were no golden children and no scapegoats. Instead, the room was filled with our chosen family. My closest friends from the liquidation firm were there, laughing loudly and sharing stories. The incredibly dedicated board members and lawyers from the Financial Advocacy Foundation I had launched with my inheritance were passing around plates of warm appetizers. In just 1 year, our foundation had already helped hundreds of women escape financial abuse, and celebrating with the team felt incredibly profound. Harrison's most trusted executive colleagues, the ones who had helped him orchestrate DeAndre's downfall, were sitting by the fire swapping jokes and drinking good wine. The contrast was so incredibly sharp, it almost felt surreal. I looked across the room and saw genuine love, mutual respect, and absolute peace. No one was demanding money. No one was throwing a tantrum because their credit card was declined by a caterer. The people at this table were here because they wanted to be, not because they were obligated by blood or trapped by a shared financial scam. I took a brief moment to reflect on the people who were completely absent from this beautiful picture. The legal boundaries I had set 1 year ago remained entirely unbroken. DeAndre was currently serving a 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary for corporate fraud and embezzlement. Sabrina stripped of her fake wealth, and her enabler husband was still scanning barcodes at the discount retail store, completely isolated from high society. My parents, drowning in the crushing weight of legal fees from Patricia's forged real estate charges, had been forced to sell their suburban home at a massive loss just to avoid total bankruptcy. They were living in a tiny, cramped apartment, miserable and utterly alone. They had spent their entire lives treating me like a stepping stone, assuming I would always be there to absorb their abuse and fund their delusions. But in their desperate attempt to destroy me, they had only managed to completely destroy themselves. Harrison tapped his silver knife gently against his crystal glass. The bright, ringing sound instantly hushed the lively chatter in the room. Everyone turned their attention toward us, their faces glowing in the warm firelight. I stepped forward, raising my glass high into the air. The room fell perfectly silent, but it was not the terrifying, tense silence of a family waiting for an argument to erupt. It was the comfortable, supportive quiet of people who genuinely cared about what I had to say. To family, I began, my voice clear and steady. The word used to carry such a heavy burden for me. It used to mean obligation, manipulation, and endless conditions. It meant shrinking myself down so others could feel big. But looking around this room tonight, I finally understand what family is actually supposed to mean. It is the people who celebrate your success instead of envying it. It is the people who protect your peace instead of destroying it. It is the people who love you for exactly who you are without ever handing you a bill for their affection. The guests smiled warmly, raising their glasses in unison. I looked at Harrison, the man who had stood by my side and helped me tear down a toxic empire to build something pure. Then I looked back at my friends, my colleagues, and my new life. I realized in that exact moment that the greatest revenge I could have ever achieved was not exposing my mother's crimes or sending my brother-in-law to prison. The ultimate revenge was simply moving on. It was healing. It was building a beautiful, untouchable life filled with joy, wealth, and genuine love. A life that they would never, ever be allowed to enter. To the family we choose, I said, smiling, a bright, unbreakable smile. To the family we choose, the room echoed back. We drank, the fire crackled, and the warm sound of laughter filled the cabin once again. I was finally home, and I was completely free. Fade out. The saga of Gemma and her toxic family powerfully illustrates one of the hardest but most liberating truths we can ever learn. Blood does not automatically guarantee loyalty, respect, or love. For too long, society has pushed the narrative that we must tolerate abuse, manipulation, and financial exploitation simply because the perpetrators share our DNA. Gemma's journey shatters this misconception, proving that staying anchored to toxic relatives only drags you down with their sinking ship. Throughout the story, Patricia, Richard, Sabrina, and DeAndre view Gemma not as a cherished daughter or sister, but as an emotional punching bag and a financial safety net. Their relentless greed and staggering entitlement eventually trigger their own spectacular downfall. By contrasting their fake criminal empire with Gemma's authentic, hard-earned success, the narrative highlights that true wealth is not measured in stolen designer bags or forged real estate deeds. True wealth is found in the peace of mind that comes from living an honest life surrounded by people who support you unconditionally. Gemma's ultimate triumph was not just watching her abusers face federal prison or financial ruin. Her greatest victory was the act of severing those toxic ties completely and building a chosen family. She learned to set ironclad boundaries, protecting her emotional well being and her assets from those who sought to exploit her. This story teaches us that it is entirely acceptable to walk away from the people who only bring chaos and pain into our lives. You do not owe anyone your peace, your money, or your future, just because you share a last name. Take a hard look at the relationships in your own life and find the courage to cut ties with those who drain your spirit so you can finally build the sanctuary you deserve.